Okay, so good afternoon from the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies here in Japan. On behalf of our co-organizers at the World Resources Institute, I'm delighted to invite you to our webinar today entitled Advancing the Net Zero Agenda Through Regional Cooperation in Green Hydrogen in Asia. My name is Eric Zussman, and I am a research director here at IGES. And we have an incredibly rich and dynamic dialogue planned for you today, which will give us a good sense of the current landscape and future projections for how we can use hydrogen to help us realize a net zero future. And to kick us off, I would like to invite the managing director from IGES, Mr. Shioshi Kawakami. And Kawakami-san has had a distinguished career in environmental leadership, holding various key positions in the Ministry of Environment, Japan, and contributed to many significant policies through that role. He assumed the current role of acting managing director here at IGES September of 2022, following his appointment as a principal fellow earlier that year. So let me kindly turn the virtual podium over to Kawakami-san. Kawakami-san, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Alexen. Esteemed guest, good afternoon. I'm pleased to welcome you all to the IGES World Resources Institute India joint webinar on advancing the net zero agenda through regional cooperation in green hydrogen in Asia. In many parts of the world, July 2023 was the hottest month in recorded history. This is not surprising, as we already know that climate change has affected weather patterns around the world. Scientists have warned us that our choices now will define the extent to which current and future generations will experience a hotter and different world. Indeed, we live in a world where a clean energy transition is more urgent than ever to reduce emissions and to save our planet. As we look for alternative energy options, there is a growing interest in hydrogen, though is already in widespread use in various industries such as fertilizer. Most of this hydrogen comes from fossil fuel-based sources called grey hydrogen, causing huge greenhouse gas emissions in the production process. However, if we produce hydrogen from renewable energy sources, this green hydrogen can work as a versatile energy carrier to decarbonize various sectors of the economy, transport, industry, and power, to name a few. Indeed, this green hydrogen can make the contributions from renewables even more significant. At the moment, the cost of producing green hydrogen from renewable is high, but hopefully technological advances will make it more affordable soon. Many countries have started exploring the options for tapping hydrogen's potential. Japan's hydrogen elaborates on using hydrogen's potential to achieve carbon neutral goals and develop a hydrogen-based society. Other countries around the globe are also exploring opportunities for hydrogen. However, developing a hydrogen economy requires collaboration and coordinated efforts among different countries, regions, and stakeholders. Multilateral banks and financing institutions need to engage in financing. Regional corporations can help to create synergies, share best practices, reduce costs, and increase competitiveness of its market. In today's webinar, we have eminent speakers and panelists from several countries and organizations who will share their views on some of the strategies and initiatives currently being implemented or planned. Our discussions today will explore the opportunity for regional cooperation on hydrogen. The webinar will also discuss the techno-economic feasibility of green hydrogen and key challenges such as cost, technology limitations, and infrastructure requirements. I'd like to thank the World Resources Institute India for co-organizing this event with IGES. Thank you for your attention, and I hope you enjoy this seminar. Thank you.
Hey, thank you so much, Kawakami-san, for giving us this very useful opening. I think this outlines some of the key objectives of our webinar today, and also puts us in a good place to hear some additional remarks in the keynote address from our distinguished speaker from the International Energy Agency. So now let me turn it over to Yue Reme, the head of the Hydrogen and Alternatives Fuels Unit at the IEA. Dr. Reme currently heads this unit, and he is overseeing the analysis of hydrogen and biofuel trends. Before moving into that role, he led the energy supply analysis and modeling for the Energy Technology Perspectives Project and authored various IEA publications. Dr. Reme holds a PhD in mechanical engineering from the University of Stuttgart. So now I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Reme.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much, Eric, for a very kind introduction. Let me just share my screen. So in my presentation today, I would like to talk about the long-term perspectives of hydrogen and the clean energy transition, but also look at some of the near-term trends where we stand today for low emission, for the use and production of low emission hydrogen. And if you look at the hydrogen sector today, it's still at a very nascent stage when it comes to the use and production of low emission hydrogen. But we see some impressive progress happening. For example, we started 3 years ago to track the progress of low emission hydrogen production projects. And actually, we've seen that when we started the work in 2021, we identified 800 projects for low emission hydrogen production. Last year, we identified 1,200 projects. And this year, currently, we identified so far 1,900 projects. So we see there's clearly a huge ramp up when it comes to the development planning for low emission hydrogen production projects, and a strong momentum for hydrogen, and of course also for good reasons. So more and more governments have realized or acknowledging hydrogen as an opportunity to address climate change and also to improve energy security. So very good reasons to tap into hydrogen as one opportunity to contributing to reach our climate ambitions while also improving energy security. I would like to start to look at the long-term role for hydrogen. So if we look at hydrogen today, it's already being used, particularly in the refining sector, in the chemical industry. And what you see here is our net zero emissions by 2050 scenario. And if you look there at the evolution of hydrogen use in these existing applications, we see that, of course, with declining oil demand, we also see declining hydrogen use in refineries. At the same time, we see moderate growth or continuous growth in the use of hydrogen in the chemical sector. But if we look at these traditional applications of hydrogen today, up to 2050, it's more stagnating overall. If we look at the overall use of hydrogen, we see that in our net zero scenario, global hydrogen use could grow by a factor of 5 between today and 2050, and it will largely expand into new applications of hydrogen. Hydrogen is almost not being used today. So here we're talking about sectors like aviation, shipping, but also parts of heavy industry like steel making. But we also have to be aware that hydrogen is not a silver bullet. So if we look at the total contribution of hydrogen to the energy demand, it contributes around 10% of final energy demand in 2050 in our net zero scenario. And that compares to a share of 50% for electricity. So clearly there's hydrogen is basically not a silver bullet, but it will be important in specific parts of the energy system where direct electrification is more difficult or more expensive. So here we're talking about, for example, about shipping. So hydrogen in the form of ammonia in our net zero scenario covers around 40% of shipping fuel demand in 2050. Synthetic kerosene being produced from CO2 and hydrogen is contributing a quarter of global aviation fuel demand. And if you look at industry, for example, the iron and steel sector, the hydrogen is covering a quarter of the energy needs in steel production in 2050. So there are areas where hydrogen will be particularly important in the future to reach net zero emissions. Of course, one precondition for hydrogen to play that role is that hydrogen is being produced from low emission technologies, meaning either from water electrolyzers using renewable or nuclear electricity, or from fossil fuels in combination with CCUS. So if you look at the production of hydrogen in our net zero emission scenario, we see there that in 2050, almost all of the hydrogen is either being produced from water electrolyzers or from fossil fuels in combination with CCUS, with electrolyzers contributing around 70% of the production in 2050 and fossil fuel with CCS for around 30%. So the scale up of low emission hydrogen production means we have to scale up these technologies, but it has also to go beyond that. So we also have to scale up, we think about producing hydrogen from electrolyzers. We also have to scale up the production of renewable electricity. So it means in our net zero scenario, for example, that we require in 2050, 15,000 terawatt hours of electricity just for hydrogen production. And just to put that number into perspective, that's 20% of the overall global electricity generation in that year. It also means that we have to ramp up, scale up the deployment of CO2 transport and storage for the production of hydrogen from fossil fuels in combination with CCUS. And there we store in 2050 around 1 gigaton of CO2 from hydrogen production, which corresponds to around 60% of total CO2 being captured and stored in 2050. So again, if you think about hydrogen production, it's not only the production itself, you also have to look at the related supply chains, particularly also electricity generation and the development of CO2 infrastructure. So this is the kind of long-term trends that we see, or the role of hydrogen that it could play when it comes to reaching net zero ambitions. But of course, the question is, where do we stand today? And I would like to start to look at the demand of hydrogen today. I already mentioned that hydrogen today is being largely used in the refining and in the chemical sector. And there we see, we saw in 2021 that hydrogen demand reached around 94 million tons of hydrogen in these sectors globally, which was a 5% increase compared to 2020, and actually was exceeding also the demand levels that we saw pre-pandemic in 2019, which was about 91 million tons. And if you look at recent numbers for last year, we also see a growth of 2% of global hydrogen demand. But of course, this growth that we've seen over the last 2 years is not really something to celebrate because it's not based on policy progress. This growth that we see is mainly occurring in traditional applications. If you look at new applications of hydrogen, like I mentioned before, the use of hydrogen in heavy-duty trucks, in aviation or shipping, there actually we saw some strong relative growth, but in absolute numbers, the demand in these new applications was less than 100,000 tons in 2022. But still, it's an encouraging sign of progress that we see there, because this growth comes to the back of technology advances in sectors where we think that hydrogen will be needed in the transition to a net zero world. For example, just give you two examples. If you look at the use of hydrogen in the steel sector, there we saw in 2021 the first pilot project using direct reduction of iron in combination with hydrogen started operation in Sweden. And since then we saw that several projects have been announced, which together could mean that in the steel sector, around 2 million tons of hydrogen using direct reduction of iron process could be used by 2030. Another example is heavy-duty trucks. There we've seen in particularly in China, a deployment of 800 trucks in 2021, and the total stock could have reached by the end of last year, using preliminary numbers, around 3,000, more than 3,000 heavy-duty trucks. So these are, of course, encouraging signs, but we also have to keep in mind, if we look at the development of global hydrogen demand based on current policies and announced projects, we see that by 2030, global hydrogen demand could reach around 115 million tons of hydrogen, of which only 2% would actually come from or would be allocated to new applications like long-distance transport, heavy-duty industries, or also the use of hydrogen, for example, as an option to decarbonize part of the power sector, like co-firing of ammonia in coal-fired power plants, but also using hydrogen for long-term storage. If we look at a scenario where countries reach their government pledges or their climate pledges, there we see that global hydrogen demand could reach 130 million tons, and around a quarter of this demand would actually be linked to the application of hydrogen. So the demand, of course, is one side of the puzzle that we have to address. The other one is the near-term supply or scaling up low-emission hydrogen production. And the growth that we've seen in terms of hydrogen demand over the past 2 years was largely, almost exclusively, being covered by fossil fuels, unabated fossil fuels, which is, of course, highly unsustainable. If we look at the production of low-emission hydrogen, we see that global production was less than 1 million tons in 2021, also stayed at that level in 2022, and largely being coming from natural gas in combination with CCS. But as I mentioned before, we see quite impressive pipeline of low-emission hydrogen production projects being announced, either from electrolyzers or from fossil fuels in combination with CCS. And if one looks at these projects, we estimate that by 2030, the global low-emission hydrogen production from these announced projects would reach around 36 billion tons, of which 24 million tons would be coming from electrolyzers and 12 million tons from fossil fuels in combination with CCS. If one looks at in terms of particularly looking at electrolyzers, there we see that based on these announced projects, the global installed electrolyzer capacity could reach 360 gigawatt by 2030, and today, or at the end of last year, we were at 0.7 gigawatts, so a massive scale up based on the announced project, if all of them are being realized. If one looks at the regional distribution of the installed electrolyzer capacity, we actually see there that around 80% of these announced projects are focused in 4 regions, particularly in Europe, in Australia, Africa, and Latin America. But also has to keep in mind here that with the ongoing policy instruments being developed, for example, like the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States, but also in India, the Production Linked Incentive Scheme, this picture could, of course, change in the coming years. And of course, despite this progress that we see when it comes in terms of announced projects, and many of these projects are also at advanced planning stages today, one has to keep in mind that only 5% of these projects actually have reached final investment decisions or under construction. So it means there's still a long way to go to realize these projects that have been announced so far. And of course, not all of these projects in the end will be realized, and also has to be realistic about that. Nonetheless, if we think about the progress that we've seen so far for electrolyzers in particular, it's a reason to believe that really a new energy economy is emerging. So to some extent, one could expect that what we've seen for electrolyzers so far is in a way similar what we've seen, or could expect in the future, similar what we've seen in recent years for solar PV, but also for electric vehicles. And one indicator to look into that is, for example, is to look at the electrolyzer manufacturing capacity. And we published in 2019 for the Japanese government the Future of Hydrogen report as part of the Japan's G20 presidency. And at that time, actually, the global electrolyzer manufacturing capacity was less than 3 gigawatts. And since then, if you look at the installed manufacturing capacity today, it stands at around 30 gigawatts. And if you look at the announced manufacturing plans, by 2030, it could reach 125 gigawatts, which is roughly corresponding or corresponds to the manufacturing capacity, or 3/4 of the manufacturing capacity needs in our net zero emission scenario. So that's, of course, quite encouraging to see. One also has to keep in mind there are caveats here. So one is that from these announced manufacturing plans, around a quarter have not yet identified where these plants will actually be built. And also only 10% of these manufacturing plants for electrolyzers are actually under construction or have reached final investment decisions. So it means, again, not necessarily all of these plans might be realized in the end. The second aspect I would like also to highlight here that, of course, these decisions for manufacturing plants are very much influenced also by policy. So investors, project developers are clearly influenced by the policy landscape. And if one looks at the recent developments, countries are kind of retailoring or even reinventing their industrial strategies, if one thinks about, which will have broad impacts on these plans for manufacturing facilities. And this is, of course, influenced by policies. If you think about the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States, the Net Zero Industry Act in Europe, or the Green Transformation Program in Japan, or already mentioned before in India, the production-linked incentive schemes. So all of these ongoing policy developments and instruments, incentive schemes being introduced, of course, will influence also where in the future, for example, in this case, plants for electrolyzers will be built. Another area I would like to mention is the trade of hydrogen. There, of course, Japan has been spearheading efforts in the past for global hydrogen trade. We saw last year the first pilot shipment of liquefied hydrogen from Australia to Japan, and under the impression of the current energy crisis, more and more countries are also looking into hydrogen as an opportunity to improve energy security. And if one looks at hydrogen trade today, particularly for fuel purposes, it's basically limited to sporadic shipments of hydrogen or ammonia. If one looks at the announced export-oriented trade projects, we see that by 2030, based on these announced projects, global hydrogen trade could reach 12 billion tons of hydrogen or hydrogen-based fuels. But many of these projects are at very early development stages today and facing various types of barriers. One of them is to identify offtake or secure customers. So if we look at the so far at the offtake agreements being realized, it's only that or export projects corresponding to production of 2.5 million tons of hydrogen actually have secured an offtaker, and another 2 million tons of projects have identified an export region, but not yet reached or is secured an offtaker. So there's clearly quite some uncertainty whether these trade projects will actually be realized by 2030. And the reasons behind these kind of uncertainty that we see for these export projects are, of course, also linked to still uncertainty related regulations like certification of hydrogen, lack of infrastructure for hydrogen trade, but also the question of how hydrogen will be treated in under international trade rules. So there's still quite some uncertainties that the development of global hydrogen trade faces today. With that, I would like just to conclude with some recommendations we think will be important for hydrogen to basically reach the level or reach the role it could play in contributing to tackle climate change and also improve energy security. So one area I would like to highlight here, of course, that we really have to move from policy announcements or project announcements to implementation. Particularly, it means that given that hydrogen is still at a very nascent stage today and the future market evolution is still quite uncertain, this is still preventing project developers to reach final investment decisions. So there's really a role for governments to reduce the risk for project developers, for example, through incentive schemes, and also improve the economic viability of these early projects. Second area is, of course, not to look only at the production of hydrogen or low emission hydrogen, but also tackle or raise the demand for low emission hydrogen. That can mean, if you look at existing applications for hydrogen, there to replace the unabated hydrogen being produced from fossil fuels by low emission hydrogen, for example, through standards, quotas, public procurement. The other area, if you look at new application of hydrogen, there these efforts need to be combined also with support to demonstration projects. Another area or third aspect to highlight is, talked about hydrogen trade. So there, if you look today at the color scheme being often used to characterize hydrogen, that's in practical terms, or it's practically quite not that useful when it comes to actual business or trade transactions. There, really transparency on the emission intensity of hydrogen production is needed to provide clarity and also facilitate investments in these trade projects. And actually, earlier this year, we produced a report together with the International Partnership on Hydrogen Fuel Cells in the Economy, IPHE, where we basically looked at the emission intensity of hydrogen production. And one key recommendation of this report that we actually prepared for Japan's G7 presidency was for countries to move to the international agreed accounting framework for hydrogen to ensure that one has a common framework how to assess the emission intensity of hydrogen. And the final point, of course, is also particularly, again, also linked to trade, that we also have to think of developing hydrogen infrastructure. Today, hydrogen is largely being produced and consumed at the same location. But if countries, but also industry wants to tap into the opportunities that we see in some regions in terms of abundant and low emission electricity resources being realized and being used for hydrogen production, we also have to think about better planning, better development, support to developing hydrogen infrastructure to take advantage of these so far unutilized, untapped resources for low emission hydrogen production that we see in many parts of the world today. With that said, I will stop here and very much looking forward to the webinar today. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Reme, for providing us with this very useful and informative overview of where we stand currently with hydrogen and what are some of the potential future reductions or projections, both in terms of the demand side and on the supply side. I think especially your last side, which gives us a very clear indication of some of the things that we need to move forward from planning to implementation, in terms of some of the standardization requirements, and in terms of some of the needs to facilitate hydrogen trade, are very, very helpful, because I think these issues will be covered by some of the more specific presentations that follow. And I want to highlight for the web attendees, I can see we have approximately 200 people online right now. For Dr. Reme himself, we're not going to open questions and answers directly for him, but if you do have some questions for him, please do share them in the chat box, and we can transfer those over to him. And similarly, we're going to now move into some of our panel discussions, and there will also be some opportunities during those panel discussions, depending upon time, to raise questions and answers. So please do type those question and answers into the chat box so we can share them with you. Once again, sort of from Hayama, a virtual round of applause for Dr. Reme. We really appreciate you opening the session for us with those very helpful insights. Now, I would like to move us over to our first panel discussion. And the panel discussion, the theme of this discussion is green hydrogen and net zero. And the session itself will focus on basically the potential of green hydrogen for realizing and pushing forward net zero transitions. In the panel discussion, we're going to have three distinguished speakers with us. And those speakers are Stephen Peters from the Asian Development Bank, Joanna Kay from Zero Carbon Hydrogen, and my colleague Nanda Kumar Janardhanan from IGES. I will run the session in this way. First, I will give a brief introduction to the panelists, and I will ask them for a 5-minute intervention where they can outline some of the key points that they would like to raise. Following each of those interventions, then I have a series of questions that I would like to ask them. As I mentioned previously, I would like to encourage our audience members to, they have questions, either for specific panelists or more generally, please do type them into the chat box. Without further ado, for the first 5-minute intervention, I would like to introduce Stephen Peters from the Asian Development Bank. Dr. Peters is a senior energy specialist at the ADB. In addition to many of his achievements, he holds a Master's of Engineering Science and Bachelor of Engineering from the University of Melbourne in Australia. He is also a past board member of Ashtam Singapore. And so for right now, I'd like to turn the virtual podium over to Dr. Peters. Steve, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Eric, and thank you for the promotion. I actually don't have a PhD, but maybe one day I'll get one. I just wanted to talk a little bit about what ADB is doing and where we're coming from. And I'll start off with this, which has come from a piece of work from ClimateWorks, which I thought was quite useful based on 2022, which talks about all of our emissions, what we're using them for, and where we're focusing. And we're doing a bit of work on hydrogen. We're not as committed as the World Bank, which has made $1.5 billion commitments, and they've got a very strong team working on it. But we're playing catch up. And the catch up we're finding with our partners, our developing member country partners, is that they need help on a number of areas. Policy is one. Some have advanced.
And what I'd like to do, given some of these technical challenges, and if it's okay with you, Joanna, what I'd like to do, yeah, I love the good thumbs up. I'd like to ask Joanna to make her intervention, and then let's see if we can also stabilize the connection over there with Steve. So I'm going to turn it over for a 5-minute intervention from Joanna Kay. And Joanna is the General Manager for Zero Carbon Hydrogen Australia, and she leads that organization in an effort to promote and develop renewable hydrogen as a sustainable fuel source for the future. And Joanna also joins the Smart Energy Council after working as the Australian Government Specialist Advisor to the International Solar Alliance. So Joanna, I'm going to turn it over to you for your 5-minute intervention, and then we'll go back to Steve if we can stabilize that connection from ADB. Joanna, over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Eric, and let's hope we get Stephen back. It's nice to have another Australian on the panel. So first and foremost, thank you, IGES as well as WRI for hosting this today. I think that it's quite timely when we talk about what's happening in renewable hydrogen around the world, and specifically here in Asia. Before I begin, I just want to do the Australian custom, which is to acknowledge the traditional owners and the Indigenous people from the land that I am working from today, which are the Kurana people from South Australia, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So I think when we talk about the opportunity for decarbonisation specifically in Asia, we're talking about Asia really being the epicenter of the decarbonisation journey for the globe. And just to give you a couple of figures, which I think is always helpful, 22% of the world's land mass resides here in Asia. It represents more than 60% of the total global energy consumption, and results in more than 60% of global carbon emissions. Therefore, what we are doing in this region is going to be paramount to what we can do globally to decarbonise. Obviously, I think one of the answers to that decarbonisation is renewable hydrogen. I don't see it as being the thing that takes us forward to be able to decarbonise as in its entirety, but it certainly is a key piece of the puzzle that will help us decarbonise our heavy fossil fuel industries, which I think is really important. So where we can use electrification around vehicles or perhaps in homes, where we are looking for renewable hydrogen is these really heavy industrial processes that we can certainly capitalise on. Dr. Remy spoke quite broadly about the opportunities in the industries that we have possibilities in, and I stand by that as well. We can see opportunities around green ammonia, green steel, decarbonisation of shipping, and certainly opportunities for clean energy trade. And I think this is where Asia kind of has a point of difference from the rest of the world, because we know that already Asia has attracted around $368 billion worth of investment to support the net zero transition. We already have a lot of multilateral and bilateral engagements and strategies within the region that we're able to, support each other to really decarbonise. A lot of the countries in this region have also signed on to the Paris Agreement, which is incredibly important. And then also we're all, and I think this is a global perspective, we're all working out where we sit after the US introduced the Inflation Reduction Act almost 12 months ago. So I like to think of the IRA as perhaps the single biggest point of climate funding by the United States, certainly in my lifetime, and if ever. And now what we've seen globally is jurisdictions around the world starting to respond to that. So obviously Canada responded very quickly. In Europe, we have the European Clean Industrial Plan. India has, and Dr. Remy spoke to it as well, the $174 billion investment into renewable hydrogen and the opportunities there. Within the region, we already know that there is still a heavy reliance on fossil fuels. So we have the greatest opportunity, I think, rather than looking at it through the lens of it being a significant undertaking. I think let's look at it as the biggest opportunity we have to make a difference and really decarbonise our area, but also globally and have some impacts on that net zero transition. One of the things that I see continuously happening when we talk about renewable hydrogen is that we don't necessarily have the framework and the policies in place to be able to scale at speed. So I think we all see that there's an opportunity, but what we do need is policy in action. And I was really happy to see Dr. Remy's first recommendation was exactly that point. And it's certainly something within my organisation, we're working really hard to make sure the Australian government is making those steps, and we are investing where we can in renewable hydrogen. People often talk to me about the challenges, and they're very difficult to overcome. And the first one is always around cost. And I found this really interesting article just recently, and it was by the Bloomberg New Energy Finance. And they talk about renewable hydrogen actually being cheaper than fossil fuel hydrogen. Fossil fuel hydrogen produced from natural gas in parts of Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. And this is based on the fact that the cost is around 70% of the PEM electrolysis. That makes sense? No. So the cost of renewable hydrogen is 70% based on the cost of electricity to feed into the PEM electrolysis process, which is a better way of saying it. So I see those costs coming down. So I see that there is a great opportunity there as well. We need more investment into infrastructure. We also know that we need, continuous driving of this agenda as well to ensure that the hydrogen that we are producing is in fact renewable hydrogen. And I think that's over 5 minutes, so I will stop there, and I look forward to talking more within the panel discussion. Thanks.
Thanks a bunch, Joanna, for outlining some of these key points about, especially Asia and some of the unique characteristics of Asia and some of the financial considerations, especially as they relate to the transition to green hydrogen. What I'd like to do now is to turn it back to Steve Peters. And Steve, thanks again for connecting back to us from Malaysia. And sorry for the interruption there, but let's go back to your first slide and pick up to the best of our ability where you left off.
Terrific. Thank you for that for everybody. Can you hear me clearly, Eric?
Yeah, we hear you fine. Thanks so much.
Terrific. Okay. So I was just going to say is that quite a deal of the work that we're being asked to do is driven by a government's desire to take part in the hydrogen economy, and specifically the green hydrogen economy. But also we're seeing a climate component and a decarbonisation component. So we're working on a national level with some of our governments, but we're also working at a corporate level on some of the activities, for instance, in hard-to-abate sectors. And we've got some work coming up next year that will be working on that. But it won't be simply a case of plugging in with hydrogen, which I think, to be very frank, the problem we have with the fossil fuel economy is because everybody wanted one thing, that's the problem that's got us here in the first place. So what I wanted to talk to about is mitigation and adaptation activities across these sectors, just very, very quickly. So if we can switch fuel, for instance, we can switch to hydrogen or methanol, but we can also, in cement, for instance, swap to refuse-derived fuels. We can have activities in process efficiencies or complete process component replacements, product redesign, distribution model changes, emission changes, and then all the related regulatory and policy issues. So it's a matter of not just the hydrogen economy being a thing for itself, but how is it embedded in decarbonisation? How is it embedded in our activities to clean up our civilization and to work in areas, for instance, like the circular economy, which sometimes can be a bit nebulous, but this is a very simple way to do that. And I just wanted to finish with one last slide. ADB's recently been funding the International Solar Alliance to set up a Green Hydrogen Innovation Centre, which is currently based in India. And obviously India is making massive strides when it comes to green hydrogen. And we're very happy to support that. That facility will be coming online sometime in the next week or so. So I refer that off to you. So I'll hand back, and please accept my apologies for dropping out. I'll try not to drop out again. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks a bunch, Steve. I really appreciate you sharing some of the insights and activities that the ADB is engaged in. And we look forward to seeing the ADB spearhead more of this activity within the region, picking up on some of the themes that Joanna also highlighted. Now, what I'd like to do is turn the virtual microphone over to my colleague, Nanda Kumar. Nandu is Deputy Director in our Climate and Energy Division. And as I like to call him, he is one of the key change makers and thought leaders at IGES on hydrogen. And he also looks really cool wearing a sport jacket and a nice gray t-shirt. So over to you, Nandu.
Thank you so much, Eric, and good afternoon, everyone. I would also like to thank WRI in joining hands with IGES for organizing this event. So hydrogen is a versatile energy carrier with a capacity to basically address some of the most pressing energy-related concerns we have at this moment. But I would actually like to sort of mention about 3 pivotal points concerning hydrogen, and emphasizing the need for collective action in basically benefiting hydrogen's potential for achieving net zero goals. And the first point I want to emphasize here is the point which actually Ramey has already mentioned. It's about the carbon footprint of hydrogen economy. So presently, the production of hydrogen, as we all know, hydrogen and ammonia, has basically lead to some sort of inadvertent emissions, and that is contributing to the global greenhouse gas emissions. So this is resulting in roughly about 830 million ton CO2 per year, and that is something equivalent to about 2% of the global GHG emissions. And interestingly, like green hydrogen production accounts for a smaller fraction as of now, constituting about less than 1% of the global production. So to address this, I mean, this is definitely a very important element which we all need to look at. And to address this, we need a sort of a concerted transition strategy for utilizing the renewable energy sources and basically expanding the renewable energy sources and utilizing that for hydrogen development. And this is not just a sort of environmental imperative, but also sort of a fundamental necessity for nations, especially in the Asian continent. And also, this is part of their efforts to meet the Paris Agreement goals. The second point I want to bring in here is that disparity in hydrogen development, especially when we look at Asia. There's a considerable variance in hydrogen development across Asia. I mean, something similar to what we see in the global scene. So in Asia, we have Japan, South Korea, China, India, all have been actually advancing hydrogen-related initiatives. And there is sort of remarkable variations in progress of each of these made so far. So, if you look at Japan, Japan has probably the largest number of patents related to hydrogen, but other countries, China is sort of progressing on implementation. India has sort of very promising policies and initiatives. But there's some sort of disparities definitely seen across these countries. So the hydrogen development within the Asian region presents sort of more of a heterogeneous picture. And this needs to be addressed. And to address that, we need to actually think of how countries in this region can sort of collaborate better, whether the traditional technology transfer mechanisms will work or something like jointly developing technologies to promote hydrogen will work, something like co-innovation approach. And the third element which I want to highlight here is that the need for investment. The previous speakers have already touched upon that, but I just want to say that the whole net zero initiatives or net zero strategies across the world definitely necessitates a lot of infusion of capital into multiple fronts. And this is also important in the case of hydrogen development. See, be it in the case of electrolysis facilities or construction of hydrogen infrastructure, also the maybe refueling stations or transportation facilities and so on. So there is a huge investment is required for hydrogen. And this investment demand, the need for this investment it cannot be undertaken in isolation, probably by just government. It has to be sort of public-private partnerships, and it also need to take into account that there needs to be adequate environment provided for industries to come forward with investments, like providing tax incentives and subsidies and regulatory frameworks and etc. So with this, I'll stop here and then I'll look forward to the questions from the panel. Over to you, Eric.
Okay, thank you so much, Nandu, for highlighting these very salient 3 points, and really also, hammering home the idea that the investment needs to come from multiple sources and needs to be drawn out by a good policy environment. I think this is really critical to making hydrogen feasible, and also, as you implied in your remarks, also realizing this co-innovation idea to make hydrogen mainstream in Asia. So what I would like to do now is I have a series of three questions. And I'd like to ask, yeah, I can see everybody on screen from the panel. That's great. So I'd like to just basically go around the panel one by one. So I'll ask a question, then I'll ask Steve to answer, Joanna to answer, and then Nandu to answer. This might also lead to, this is often the case, some potential offshoot questions. And as I mentioned previously, do feel free to put questions in the chat box. I see some people have already done that. To facilitate engagement with the wider audience. Let me begin with the first question. And the first question we'll start with Steve. It's really sort of getting to the heart of the issue about the potential for hydrogen to facilitate a net zero transition. I think, there's been a lot of promise and a lot of weight placed on the role of hydrogen in triggering these net zero transitions. But to what extent do you really consider green hydrogen as a panacea, or is there perhaps some false promise there, or to use some different terminology? To what extent are we dealing with an oasis, or are we dealing with a mirage when it comes to green hydrogen? So Steve, over to you.
I suppose it's which newspaper or which website you look at. It depends, for instance, what people's political bent is. But from our position, our job is to support our developing member countries. So our job is to make sure that we support them and give them the help and provide them with the best access to the best information we can. It's not our job to tell them what to do. Our job is just to say, this is what other people have done. Would you like to meet them? So these sorts of venues are very useful to us. Is it a panacea? No. Is it a waste of time? No. It's somewhere in between. And I think there are areas where it makes a lot of sense. I'll draw an example. ETH in Zurich recently talked about a paste which they can store high densities of hydrogen in. If that cassette technology came out, and it could come out very, very quickly, it could come out within a matter of years, that would revolutionize the way, for instance, that we do light aviation, the ways that we could do other activities. I think, and the point I wanted to get across is, in startups, I think we're making suggestions about what we know with our current industrial capacity and our current industrial pathways. I think you're going to find there's going to be a lot of different business models that comes out, and it's not just swapping fuels or swapping process. It might be swapping delivery. I'll use another example in fertilizers. If we were to use biochar mixed with seaweed, which would be fantastic for the Pacific, because it would catalyze a whole bunch of industries in the Pacific and catalyze wealth creation there. We could displace a significant component of traditional fertilizers. Now, how real is that, and how can we achieve it? Well, ask me in 2 years, because that's what we're going to be working on. So that's where I'm coming from, Eric. I think there is a role, but it's certainly not, it's not everything, right? It's not the Messiah.
Thanks for sharing that very nicely illustrated and nuanced perspective with us. I think that's useful. Let me turn the same question over to Joanna. So how do you see it, Joanna? Panacea, or are somewhere in between? What's your view on this?
Yeah, sure. Look, it's not a panacea. It's not single-handedly going to solve all our energy and environmental challenges. But it's certainly, we can't do that without hydrogen. So I think I'm a little bit perhaps stronger in my opinion than Stephen on this. We can't transition and we can't reach our net zero targets without renewable hydrogen being part of the conversation. And I think it's a bipartisan issue. I think that both sides of governments see hydrogen not only as like an opportunity to decarbonize, but there's also significant economic opportunities around clean energy trading, the decarbonisation of these certain industries. And as particularly if I use Australia as an example, as we continue to move away from our dependence on the fossil fuel industry, we're closing down coal mines and gas stations as part of our decarbonisation journey. what we're doing by creating a hydrogen economy here in Australia is actually creating a lot of jobs. It's been able to create a skilled workforce or leverage an existing skilled workforce into a new sector. We're actually looking at it through the lens of the economic benefits that can actually be afforded to Australia by establishing a renewable hydrogen industry. If you think about the supply chain in its entirety and what driving a renewable hydrogen economy looks like, it also means that other areas of the renewable energy industry, solar panels and alike, wind turbines, all that technology will continue to improve and the cost of renewable energy will continue to fall, thus providing an end result for the consumer. And hydrogen is all part of that discussion. So it's certainly not going to single-handedly solve all of our problems. I don't think there's many, or there might be one or two people on the planet that think that way, but it certainly is. We're not going to achieve what we want to achieve without renewable hydrogen. And I think that's a really, really important kind of piece of the puzzle that we all need to think about what it looks like and through different lenses as well on how we can make it happen.
Thanks so much, Joanna. So I think this is really adding some useful insights in terms of framing where hydrogen sits, as an important piece of the puzzle, not a panacea, but important piece of the puzzle. And I also like the fact that you drew attention to some of the additional benefits from, working with hydrogen to accelerate decarbonization, especially the job story, I think is going to be critically important, not only in Australia, but in other countries. I'd like to now turn the same question over to Nandu. And Nandu, how do you see hydrogen? I think there's a broad consensus that it might not be a panacea, but can you reflect a little bit on the type of adjectives and modifiers we could use to describe where it sits in this decarbonization journey?
Thank you. In fact, I don't have much to add to what Stephen and John has already mentioned, but I would like to sort of probably break it down to what actually are the important aspects for hydrogen's progress. I mean, definitely, I don't actually see it as a panacea, but at the same time, certain elements that are going to be critical in hydrogen's journey, especially first point is about the cost of production, and the current hydrogen production cost is sort of prohibitively high, and that is making economic challenges at the current in the current context. But as Stephen mentioned, things can actually change because we are looking at green hydrogen from the current context, and this is definitely going to change. And then we'll also have a task of enabling mass adoption of hydrogen. I mean, that is one of the very important element that those economies as well as those stakeholders who are involved in the hydrogen sector will have to take into account. And in terms of technology maturity and economies of scale and all, the same thing will reflect there as well. That means as we move forward, things will definitely change and will be more, the wind will be more in favor of hydrogen. But at the same time, I don't actually want to sort of say it's going to be a panacea for, to address net zero emissions. Thank you.
Thanks a bunch, Nandu, for sharing some of those insights on sort of the steps that we might need to follow to accelerate along this transition pathway. And I think that also leads us into a sort of, nice circular movement that we're going on in terms of the next question, really. I think this is really well done. I don't know if it was done intentionally by Nandu, but I think he has some insight into the next question. So let's move to the next question. And the next question is really about some of the structural changes that would be needed in the energy landscape to facilitate the acceleration and scaling of hydrogen. So I want to see from Steve's perspective, what do you see as some of the key sort of structural changes that need to happen to make hydrogen increasingly feasible?
Elephant in the room, fossil fuel subsidies. 7.2% of global GDP. How are you going to compete with an industry that has a 7%? It's madness, right? Fossil fuel subsidies. I'm not an economist, I'm an engineer. And before I joined ADB, I ran my own business. And it's just like tying one hand behind your back to try and compete in this particular area, right? So you have people say, oh, hydrogen's very expensive. But well, I wonder how expensive it would be compared to an unsubsidized fossil fuel alternative. That's the elephant in the room. And, as much as economists and politicians and everybody want to talk about that, we need to recognize it. And some countries get it. I can't go into detail, but making hydrogen out of local resources is a resilience issue. It's an energy resilience issue because you don't have to rely on importing oil. You don't have to rely on, as I can tell, I'm an Australian. I haven't lived there for 26 years, but, we import all of our diesel. It's all refined offshore. So how resilient are we in the event of a geopolitical shock? Not particularly at all. Just the same as many of ADB's developing member countries who are probably don't have the benefit of energy stores. So going to that point about what are the opportunities for us, and I do believe hydrogen is one of them, and I totally agree with Joanna, and she pulled me up quite rightly, saying that that it is part of it, and it is an essential part of our energy journey to be net zero and net negative, right? But the real issue for a lot of our developing member countries is keeping people employed, and the green growth component of it is important, but keeping industry going. I can go into detail, but a couple of our countries rely heavily on industrial gases. If you don't have energy to produce industrial gases, your industry will stop within a week, right? So we talk about, being resilient and having a globalized world. I think to be resilient, we need to look at this from an outside globalized agenda and say, what is it that you can do with your local areas? I'll use an example. This is the Marshall Islands in the background, right? The Marshall Islands has an enormous amount of marine energy potential, which could be used to make hydrogen. It could be used and that hydrogen could be used to power the fishing fleets for the North Pacific, which it's a hub from. When we mentioned this to them, they just said, oh, really? And most people said, oh, that's a fantasy. Talk to me in 10 years and see where that's coming from. So my view is that there's a lot of the things that we take for granted and say this is the way it is, well, maybe they won't be in 5 years or 10 years. And I sincerely hope they're not in 5 or 10 years. So I'll hand over to Joanna because I'm sure she's got lots to say, and I think Nandakumar's going to have a bit to say as well.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate you bringing in the picture in the background. That was really helpful. Joanna, over to you.
Yeah, I was going to point that out too. It looks like Stephen has the best office amongst all of us. But yeah, look, I think when we talk about what will happen to the global landscape, Steve makes a really good point when he talks about energy security and sovereign security around energy. In Australia, particularly, we're looking at domestic consumption, but also exporting. And I think there has been a shift globally. If I can talk about geopolitics for a minute, we've seen a shift in the last, I would say the last maybe late part of the decade around a move away from globalization. So instead of having these multilateral type of activities, we now have bilaterals, right? We want to make sure that each sovereign country has the opportunity to produce and secure their own energy supply. And of course, with the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, that certainly brought that even to the forefront of these discussions. But I think what's really going to happen is countries are going to start looking, if we talk about it from a decarbonisation perspective, you can potentially offset a lot of your carbon production or opportunity by importing green energy. And by that, what I mean is in Australia, we have like an abundance of renewable energy resources, and we're very grateful for that. We also have a lot of critical minerals. So we are digging up iron ore and shipping it offshore. But what we have now is an opportunity to actually do that initial processing. And I'm certainly not an engineer or an expert in iron ore, but what we can do is that initial processing of iron ore using renewable hydrogen, creating that heat and then shipping it offshore to be able to produce green steel in other countries like Japan, which has an incredible steel manufacturing program, but also countries like Korea as well. So part of that carbon intensive process is actually done in locations where we have an abundance of renewable energy resources. So there will be some, opportunities between countries and jurisdictions to actually work together to be able to kind of change the footprint of what we're doing through renewable hydrogen as well. I think we'll also see a lot of technological advancements, and often when I talk about renewable hydrogen, I talk about where solar was perhaps in the early 2000s or mid 2000s, and the transition that we needed to go through, particularly around government investment, subsidies, those types of things to increase the adaptation of solar, but also increase the research and development around solar. And we need that similar, government incentives and subsidies to be part of that process and accelerate hydrogen, renewable hydrogen use and production. I think within Australia, we have in our federal budget in May this year announced a $2 billion hydrogen Head Start program. And this is really a credit system to kind of lower the cost or bridge the cost of renewable hydrogen so we can see it scaled and we can start to see that hydrogen economy develop. But to Stephen's point, yeah, we have huge diesel subsidies, and it's problematic, and it continues to be problematic because the way that we need to, I guess, remove ourselves from the reliance of the fossil fuel energy like diesel and coal is a transition process. And we certainly, if we had all the money that went into the subsidies around this, then we could perhaps certainly escalate and scale hydrogen at speed with that investment. So I think that kind of hopefully answers that question specifically. Eric, I also noticed that there's a couple of questions in the Q&A. Will we circle back to them in the end, or do you want us to answer as we go along?
So we have about 5 minutes left in the panel discussion, so I'm going to ask you to type into the Q&A box if possible. But thanks for raising that point, Joanna, and also thanks for reiterating the need for the subsidy removal and also highlighting this interesting example. I think, it's not always easily appreciated that, the connection, for instance, between Australia generating some of the hydrogen and then using in steel production in Japan. I think this is a really nice illustration of some of the structural changes that will need to be in place to facilitate the changes that we need. And let me turn it over to Nandu on the structural change question, and I'd like to hear some of your insights, Nandu.
Thank you, Eric. In fact, I would actually try to look at from a different perspective that what kind of changes can happen in the global energy landscape because of hydrogen's progress. I think that will definitely be an interesting way to look at it. So, as you know, like even the entire net zero transition initiatives itself involve a lot of changes in the energy system. I mean, not just replacing fuels, but also sort of new policies, newer technologies, newer environmental policies, and sort of economic initiatives are actually coming up. About hydrogen's sort of the change actually which hydrogen is going to bring in. I mean, there have been sort of reports from IEA and IRENA talking about what kind of geopolitical changes hydrogen is going to bring in. And that is probably like most important, especially the fact that today the global energy landscape is sort of dominated by fossil fuel supplying countries. And if you're actually looking at a hydrogen-based or sort of clean and green hydrogen-based economy, definitely the renewable rich countries And with those actually having advanced technologies, will be major producers and will be sort of will have a major role in commanding how the geopolitics should work, and also will actually be sort of making substantial change in the way the trade flows and economy works. So that is actually one of those points which I would like to look at. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Nandu. I think that highlighting some of these geopolitical dynamics is a nice capstone to some of the points that were raised by Steve and Joanna. We have about 3 minutes left for the panel discussion. So rather than raising a sort of big substantive question that might take a little bit more time to get through, I just want to give it back to each of our panelists and ask them if there's just sort of a 1 minute soundbite or a 30-second soundbite that they would like to share that they think, you know, is sort of absolutely critical to help advance hydrogen and help us move forward the net zero transition. So we've already heard, I think, a little bit of this, but you know, a 30-second to 1 minute soundbite of the sort of absolute critical thing that needs to be done to move forward hydrogen, especially in Asia. I know it's a tough question and tough ask for the very end, but I think it will be useful for us to sort of distill some key messages. Steve, over to you.
Yeah, Eric, I knew you were going to ask for 1 minute, so here you go. The countries that we work with, our developing member countries, need capability development. They need to understand what's going on. They need to see what's going on internationally. They need help. And our job is not to just give people money and design projects, but it's actually to give people help and give them access to the resources. So that resource sharing across countries is going to be really important if we're going to respond to a global problem of climate change and environmental pollution. That's one thing. Second thing is, I think we're all wedded to the existing infrastructure we have. You know, I mean, obviously Australia has this, you know, long-term mentality of export, but we also have an opportunity to change some of the dynamics of how our economies work. And for developing member countries coming from perhaps a lower base or a less sophisticated base, they're in a position where they can leapfrog. So I think, you know, putting into industries, I'll use an example behind me, the Marshall Islands. If you look at the amount of tidal energy and wind and wave energy that's available here, they could very quickly produce enough fuel to fuel the whole Pacific fleet. The question's going to be, are they capable of attracting that investment and are they capable of managing it? And the answer is they need a lot of help. Other countries, perhaps like Indonesia, would be in a much stronger position because they've got that background. And I'll just pose one final question for our friends in Japan. There's a lot of offshore wind potential in Japan. It'd be fantastic to make hydrogen there too. So on that note, I'd thank you very much and thank you for IGS to having me present.
Thanks so much, Steve, and thanks for turning the question back to Japan a little bit, while also highlighting some of the needs of the developing member countries that you're working with. Joanna, same question over to you, sort of a 30-second to 1 minute soundbite. What do we need to make this hydrogen transition feasible?
Great, thank you. I'll do my top three. The first one is government investment. So government investment will unlock private sector capital, which is what we need to create the hydrogen industry, I think, across globally, but particularly in Asia. The second one is sound certification schemes, and Dr. Remy spoke about it, I think, in one of his recommendations. We have a zero carbon certification scheme, making sure that the carbon that is embedded in that hydrogen is actually is low or close to zero, to ensure that we are, you know, using hydrogen that is actually renewable. So I want to take out all the other colours of the rainbow when it comes to hydrogen production. And the third one is around social license. And I think having communities buy into what hydrogen and the hydrogen opportunity is, and that plays a little bit into particularly the opportunities for jobs and skilling, but also around where those hydrogen facilities can potentially be. And I want to leave with a really cool soundbite. So I'll just read this from my notes. Australia has 262,000 square kilometres, which is suitable for renewable hydrogen production based on the access to renewable electricity and water supplies. Now, this alone could could be used to make more than the 2050 predicted global demand of hydrogen. So if you think about the scale, we have it, we have the opportunity, we have the space in Asia, and we certainly should be working together to get that adaptation happening. Thank you.
Thanks a bunch, Joanna, for highlighting this potential in Japan and for noting the importance of investment, the certification, and social license as 3 key points. Nandu, we got 15 seconds on you.
Okay, thank you, Eric. I think we have actually talked about the hardware of hydrogen development in terms of technology, economic tools, and policy tools. So this I would actually look at it as hardware of hydrogen development. But if I look at the software part, I think that is about the hydrogen debate. And currently, the advantage hydrogen debate has is that it is happening in a connected world. Unlike what we have seen decades back, when renewable energy was actually, encountering all those challenges and negative criticism. So the advantage hydrogen has is actually that debate is happening in a connected world, and I believe that hydrogen will benefit from that debate. Thank you so much.
Thanks a bunch, Nandu, for those really useful closing insights. And I think we've had an incredibly rich exchange. I think we've learned that, to make the hydrogen transition possible, that it's really going to require multi-level integration, working from across the Marshall Islands to Australia to Kawasaki, Japan, and many places in between. I deeply appreciate the inputs from our esteemed panel here. I think we learned a great deal. And I think we've also set us up for a nice exchange for the rest of the webinar. And so what I'd like to do now is move us over to the second panel, where we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the regional dynamics. And that panel is going to be led by my colleague, Dr. Kentaro Tamura, who is the program director at our climate and energy area here at IGES. And Tamura-san is a distinguished thinker and actor on climate policy, both in Japan, Asia, and globally. And he's worked extensively with policymakers in Japan and beyond in thinking about and helping move forward the net zero transition. So with that, I'd like to end this panel and then turn it over to Tamura-san. Tamura-san, the floor and the panel is yours.
Thank you very much, Eric, for kind introduction. And this is Kentaro Tamura. I'm very pleased to chair this following session titled Hydrogen in Asia, Regional Dynamics. I think some of the speakers in the previous session pointed out the importance of government law in making hydrogen transition actually happen. So that is, I think, good bridge to this second session. Here we focus on how government, Asian countries are approaching hydrogen-related initiatives, policy and collaboration. So we have excellent 5 speakers with good regional perspectives. I mean, covering Central Asia, East Asia, and South Asia, and South Asia and Southeast Asia. This session goes as follows. First, I'd like to ask to each speaker to make a 5-minute presentation. I'd appreciate if you stick to 8 minutes. Then I'd like to take a question from the audience. So if you have any questions, please use Q&A function in the Zoom. Okay, so let's move on to the presentation. First, I'd like to invite Miss Dina Azagaiwa. Sorry for my bad pronunciation. She's from the Asia Development Bank Institute. She will talk about hydrogen development in Central Asia. So, Dina, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Tamura-san. Many thanks to IGES for inviting me to this excellent event. Yeah, I'm very excited about this hydrogen and how it develops. It's developed so fast, so we always listen to new news. So I will not describe much about hydrogen because the previous session excellently explained. So there are many benefits for hydrogen. Not everywhere hydrogen is needed. I like how Nanda Kumar said, it's not the panacea, but it's a piece of the puzzle. So completely agree. Okay, let me go to the about Central Asia, because I was included in agenda as to talk about Central Asia, hydrogen in Central Asia. So I'm originally for Central Asia myself. So the benefits of when people ask me like, so what's with hydrogen? Why do we need it? I say, oh, it depends on are you going if it's country exporting or importing. So when countries ask how to develop policy, what to do, I always say it depends if country is exporter or importer. So if we talk about exporting countries, right? So for them, benefits is a source of revenue. They can also when in order to drive costs down, you need large volume of hydrogen. So then if you can export, you can also consume locally at low cost. So that's also benefit. Example of such countries who decided to be exporters, Southeast Asia. So we'll have speaker from Indonesia after me, then Middle East, Australia, and Central Asia. And for countries who are importing, they, of course, benefits are different. Examples like Japan, European Union. So they have high demand for energy and not enough supply. So that's why they want to import. Exporting countries, usually when they have they can supply a lot of energy, but the local demand is lower than the supply. So then they can export. So what are the issues with hydrogen? And I'll focus again on Central Asia. Of course, there are many issues, but let me just mention three, which I think most crucial. That's first of safety, but I'm not going to focus on the safety because I think safety, same any region, any country issue. But cost and infrastructure, that's what depends on the country and region. So cost, yeah, hydrogen, green hydrogen, very expensive. So let me focus on green hydrogen here. Green hydrogen, very expensive. Cost, many organizations say will be fall by 2050. But still, it's very expensive. And so we need to produce at scale in order to drive costs down. One of the ways to drive costs down, do it at scale. So what is demand for hydrogen in Central Asia? Because exporting is easy to say, but hard to do, right? How are you going to export? Because hydrogen is a gas, right? It's big volume, light, but big volume. So how are you going to export? Central Asia, landlocked countries. If you haven't heard this term, landlocked means basically we cannot just send a ship to European Union or to Japan, right? It's easy for countries who got access to ocean. They can just put it on the ship and the ship goes to Japan or European Union. When it's landlocked, means transportation goes, let's say, railway, then boat, then again railway, then cars, like that, so it's many or could be pipeline, of course, if it's built, if there is a pipeline. So for landlocked transportation is more complicated than by the sea. And then infrastructure, right? So that's what I explained, this how to export this big volume, lightweight gas. Okay, so this is the infrastructure. Now, for Central Asia, there are not only barriers, there are also drivers for having green hydrogen. So far, in Central Asia, two countries which progressed greatly in hydrogen, that's Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. So they are drafting national hydrogen strategies, they're working on policies and so on. Many people believe that Central Asia has a big potential. And actually, some claim that it will be largest green hydrogen producer will be Kazakhstan. But I know other countries also say similar things. So let's see. Drivers. Okay, what are drivers? What Central Asia has, what for example Japan doesn't have, it's a vast territories. If you ever been to Central Asia, so you can see my background photo of Tokyo. Very crowded, no land. And if you put even solar panels on top of every building, they cannot produce enough energy for the population of Tokyo, right? And then the rest of land is mountains. And so what Central Asia we have We have vast, vast territories, and specifically my country, Kazakhstan, I'm from North Kazakhstan, the land is flat. So very spacious, lots of land, very flat. So that could be used for putting solar panels and wind turbines. That's what is planned, to put huge solar power plants and wind turbines. Then renewable energy will be used to produce green hydrogen, right? And because population is so small, we have very low population density, very small population means energy demand is very low. So it means whatever renewable energy installed, it probably will have excess, and that excess could be sold, exported abroad. For example, how can you sell electricity? Electricity, it's not easy to sell, right? Not easy to export, I mean. You cannot store it in electric cables. It has to be stored somewhere by some means. So hydrogen is a great storage. So then it could be exported, or also could be used for producing green products. For example, green steel, ammonia, and then export of green steel or ammonia. So that's the plan. And then it's an opportunity for countries to export, to gain revenue of export from green hydrogen. Okay. So then, but there are barriers. Some barriers, water, hydrogen produced from water. So water is, especially with climate change, water becomes less and less available. As I said, region is landlocked, and could be that local demand for hydrogen is limited. Then the region will rely on demand from abroad as well. So these are my suggestions. So great news that agreements were signed in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. And last year in Kazakhstan, great deal signed, and actually it was advertised as possibly will be the world's largest green hydrogen production in Kazakhstan. So that was $50 billion with the help from European Union, and we'll be able to produce target 20 gigawatt of green hydrogen. And then it can be used for local needs and exporting to European Union and also in Asia, and production of green products like green steel, and then exporting green products. Uzbekistan deal a bit smaller, 10 billion with Saudi Arabia company, and also was signed this year recently. And also they have planned for 1.5 gigawatt of green hydrogen production. So I think this is great news, just happened last year and this year. And hopefully more countries will be able to get such great deals. So there's a nice graph produced by UNECE where Central Asia is in terms of green hydrogen. So on the top right corner, the countries which the countries which have so the vertical axis means resource potential for hydrogen production, what they are capable to do, that's potential of green hydrogen. And on horizontal, it's policy ambition, how much we want to produce, right? So ambition and capability. And when ambition and capability meet, that's where Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan are located. However, if potential is great, but not much progress on policy, that's Turkmenistan. And there are countries which UNC says that low potential and low ambition, that's Kyrgyz Republic and Tajikistan. Yeah. So let's see on the progress with this project in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, and also hopefully other countries also will be able to get such great deals for green hydrogen production. Yeah, and I would like just to mention that this year ADBI we're planning a book on green hydrogen in developing Asia Pacific, and it will be published hopefully soon on ADBI website. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lina, for sharing your insight on the barrier drivers for green hydrogen development in Central Asia. And also it is good to know that, actual development in the Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. Thank you very much. Then I'll try to move on to next speaker, Mr. Ohira Eiji, from New Energy and Industrial Technology Development Organization, NEDO, Japan. So he will talk about hydrogen development in Japan. So Ohira-san, you have the floor. I think you are muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
thank
yes.
you. Yeah, thank
Yes,
you. Thank
please.
you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Tamara-san. And thank you very much for the environment. It's very important and the meeting. And today I bring some information about how we Japan is promoting hydrogen. And recently, and so the situations on the hydrogen so extremely and changing. Just several years ago, a lot of people, even in Japan, are skeptical about hydrogen, but hydrogen too expensive. It's very difficult to spreading out. But now, it's a kind of global consensus. Hydrogen plays a very important role to achieve the carbon neutrality. And a lot of countries have developed a national hydrogen strategy and a huge amount of the hydrogen, huge amount of money going to invest in the hydrogen. We are very much welcome. We're very encouraged to in this kind of the activity. But we believe that Japan still take a leadership in this field. So by bringing them to today, I bring the Japan policy and current activity in hydrogen field. And as you know, Japan, the first country, has to develop the national and the strategy. It launched almost 6 years ago, in December in 2017. And this is strategy and the vision that toward 2050 and the action plan toward 2030. The most important of the, I think, this strategy is this is developed by the leadership of the Japan Prime Minister. It means it's kind of the top priority in Japan to promote hydrogen. And after 6 years, the Japanese government just revised this strategy in the last June. And but a new version of the hydrogen strategy with several items to aid it. And one of it in setting new targets. When we have the hydrogen introduction target in 2030 and 2050, and then we added 2040 a full target. It's 12 million tons of the hydrogen in 2040. And we also recognize electrolysis play a very important role to provide clean hydrogen. So we set at the 15 gigawatts and Japan technology spreading out worldwide in 2030. Doesn't mean. And also, this strategy had mentioned about the Japan to promote low carbon hydrogen or clean hydrogen. With the definition of low carbon hydrogen, it is the 3.4 kilogram CO2 emission while producing the 1 kilogram of hydrogen. And also, this important thing is, and the previous strategy is just energy and environmental strategy. But this version, we make it industrial strategies. And we expected a huge amount of investment, public-private investment in this field. We also are setting the prioritizing the technologies and like electrolysis, hydrogen supply chain, the fuel cell. It's going to be spreading it out, not in Japan, but also the worldwide. And this is a kind of rough roadmap and for 2030. I think the area covered by hydrogen and quite wide from the hydrogen supply side, the demand side, and short term, mid term, long term. There's many action items in front of us, but I would like to stress the year of 2030 is a very important year for us because we may start in hydrogen power generation. We use the hydrogen for the hydrogen gas turbine instead of liquefied natural gas. And to meet huge amount of the hydrogen demand, we start to import hydrogen in 2030. We also to commercialize domestic renewable hydrogen as a new sources, new hydrogen sources. We just have only 6-7 years. We need to accelerate all the activity to meet 2030 target. And this figure shows the current status. In Japan, the first country that to succeed to commercialize the fuel cell application, which is a residential fuel cell, namely any farm. This is not the hydrogen direct application, but we use the city gas and reforming on site. We have the almost 500,000 units in Japan. In the mobility sector, just behind the US and Korea and sometimes China, but we already have this over this around 8,000 passenger vehicle and over the 100 and fuel cell dominant buses running regularly, especially in Tokyo area. From the next, I will show the current update information about R&D on the hydrogen fuel cells, well, especially in scaling up technologies. In 2030, I would like to develop the international hydrogen supply chain. The big challenge is that how to concentrate on the hydrogen for long distance transportation. With the liquefied hydrogen, it's one of the most promising hydrogen carrier for long distance transportation. And through the several years work, and we will develop the small but world first and liquefied hydrogen tanker. And our first and second journey between Japan and Australia completed with successfully. Our next plan in scaling up this tanker, and for the new commercial scale tanker will be over 100 times bigger hydrogen capacity compared to the current liquid hydrogen tankers. And we call the hydrogen for a first of taker will be an electric company that may use the hydrogen for gas turbine. Yes, and to promoting the green hydrogen, the scaling up electrolysis is very important. We started to produce this project. We started this project 6 years ago, and we already developed a single stack world largest alkaline electrolysis scale with 10 megawatts. Well, we continue this work and to improve technology, especially reliability, and also we are on a plan to scaling up for using the multiple 10 megawatt stack for this is the image for and 100 megawatt water electrolysis systems. While the demonstration project, we have already produced some kind of green hydrogen. We are providing the green hydrogen to the some demand side in Fukushima and the prefecture. Fukushima is one of the local government who are actively promoting hydrogen and various applications such as the fuel cell, stationary fuel cell, hydrogen filling station, and any other item in this prefecture. Collaborate with this application. And we make it Fukushima one of the hydrogen valley in Japan. And finally, I will show about the international project. And this figure and an overview of the current demonstrated activity at the port of Los Angeles. From the viewpoint of the air pollution control, electrification of the port equipment and tracks and became the important issue in this area. A battery would be an option, but there would be a limitation due to running time and charging time. Through a demonstration, several fuel cell applications such as the top handler, rubber tag and trick vane, track, and integrated with the hydrogen production and the distribution infrastructure, we'd like to create potential to hydrogen and identify the barrier to disseminate and the hydrogen application in this area. And I'm sorry, just over beyond my time, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ohira-san, for providing us some update of Japanese initiatives, particularly the revision of the basic hydrogen plan of Japan, which have a more ambitious target and also planning for fund. Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, so then I'd like to move to next speaker, Jyothiral KR, Government of Kerala. he will talk about hydrogen development in Asia, India.
Yeah.
So.
Good afternoon. Am I audible? Yeah. I got a small presentation.
Yes.
My presentation is visible. Yeah. Is it visible? Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Tamara-san and other fellow panelists. In fact, thank you for giving an opportunity. In fact, India is in the, this nutshell, I would like to just, since most of the other speakers have covered it, see, world, the hydrogen is going to contribute 6% of the cumulative emission reduction by 2050 and maybe 10% of the total energy consumption by 2050. And if you come to India, India is planning to become, we already set up a national hydrogen mission. And in fact, we are targeting roughly around 5 million metric ton by hydrogen to be produced. And in fact, waivers of import duty, ISTS charges, PLI schemes have been announced. Almost 200 billion has been announced. State itself has announced 2 billion for the meeting the viability gap funding. Then aggregation of demand. In fact, one of the key things is that, you need to have local demand. Then second is water availability. And third one is support for import or export. And the facilities better. And ammonia and methanol being the low-hanging fruit, I think this is, and hard-to-abate sectors are the one which is targeted initially. In fact, India has already developed the HICE engines where you can convert the existing IC engines into HICE. So these are the maybe low-hanging fruits, and probably we need to go for, as NIDO has presented, liquid hydrogen as a for international trade. Maybe ammonia and methanol we can start with. Probably we'll have to look into liquid hydrogen transport across the globe. And the facilities of the port for import as well as export need to be developed. If you take Indian context, so many companies have announced the gigawatt scale production of electrolyzer, and this is almost 8.5 gigawatt is what has been announced by various companies, including Omium, Reliance, Adani, etc. In fact, if you look at the global scenario, India and USA, the addition of RE is one of the highest in India and USA, and probably India, we are targeting something around 500 gigawatt. I think that's a huge maybe jump, and we are capable of doing it. In fact, these are the corporates which are already partnerships have been signed with Greenco, with Uniper, and Acme with Scatec and Yara, Gale. I think almost all companies, a lot of companies have come forward to invest in. That's a positive sign. And in fact, what are the advantages of India? High RE potential and low cost of generation of renewable, and probably one of the lowest in the world, almost 2 cents or you say 2 rupees. We are able to generate. And India and probably Kerala, we have developed the first solar airport in the entire world. So, and we are now running even electric boats using the LTO batteries from maybe Toshiba. 76 boats, under a single command using open protocol. I think probably that will be one of first of its kind in the entire world. So I think we are now slowly switching over for water transport into fuel cell and maybe HICE engine based. Then the ease of doing business, emerging R&D and skilling destination. I think hydrogen valleys are proposed across the country. I think that's a great beginning. And Kerala with the highest rainfall, pumped storage potential, 3,000 TMC of water is there. We are the tip of India, and probably for both for Japan, Korea, as well as Europe. I think we are at the tip of India for transporting or exporting energy from our port. In fact, India's largest transshipment hub is coming in Vizhinjam by the Adani. So that is another major beginning. And enough demand centers are there, whether it is fertilizer, refineries, or Petronet, or Cochin Airport. So various mobility as well as transport and steel and refinery. Enough demand is there in the country, and probably that is one of the plus points. In fact, we are in touch with the Hamburg and other ports so that the export as well as import facilities need to be developed, both storage as well as pipelines. Now, I think probably this I will skip it because everyone knows that the hydrogen mostly coming from natural gas, and India is importing heavily. So we are largest importer of ammonia in the world. 21.7% is imported by us. these are the excellent RE resources. In fact, if you see the variation across the 365 days, I think India is minimal and probably compared to any of the European countries. So then this average wind speed also we are quite, it's I think it's almost stable, and the variation is very minimal. And the comparison levelized cost, and also if you take, I think India is one of the lowest place thanks to the renewable energy available at cheapest rate. And maybe by blue hydrogen, I think we'll be competitive by 2025 and gray by 2027. And if you see whether we can achieve $1 per kg, that's our target. In fact, there are some companies which have shown interest in investing where they are already with the membraneless electrolyzer, they are able to achieve $1 per kg. So I think we are looking at such investment. In fact, the Europe needs almost 10 million metric tons of hydrogen, and it needs 880 ships. That is where I think the tie-up between Kawasaki and I think Indian shipyards, including Cochin shipyard, is very relevant, because we need so many ships to be manufactured. Maybe 5 to 10 years we need to make it happen. This is a comparison of which are the carriers and what are the costs and what are the pros and cons. I'm not getting into details due to paucity of time. So this is a national hydrogen mission which has been announced, 5 million metric tons per annum, and maybe 6 lakhs jobs will be created, and this will reduce the emission by almost 50 million metric ton. And various end-to-end approach, right from R&D, the skilling part, the pilot projects, the hubs, green hub, and hydrogen hubs have been announced. And in fact, we have entrusted the MEC intelligence to prepare the DPR for the Kochi hub. Similarly, other states are also coming out with hubs. Green fertilizers and what is planned year-wise has been mentioned here. Then maybe why Kerala? Because we are one of the first states to announce that we want to be carbon neutral by 2050. National target is 2070. We want to be 100% RE by 2040, and we have got a water resource, the power at the lowest rate, tidal potential, pumped hydro, then the port facilities which and enough CTU capacity, and probably we need to develop just like and the government of India has already announced the standards for the hydrogen. That's a good thing. Now I think probably certification and demand probably trading platform needs to be developed. I think that's a global requirement. Then infrastructure and the ports need to be developed. I think we are working on it. Probably we are one of the first states to bring in a green tax. So that was initially for promoting electric vehicle. Probably that same thing can be extended to other. We have put a viability gap funding for attracting investment, and probably these are we have prepared a mitigation strategy, and probably I'll skip this slide. Basically for climate change, net zero, what needs to be done. Individual action plans have been developed for each sector, and these are some of the projects which are in the pipeline, like floating solar. In fact, I was happy to see that Australia has developed this 3D printing of solar panels that can be done. We have got 8,000 kilometers canals, almost 9 gigawatt we can generate from the floating solar. Then we signed up with the Norway's offshore windmills. What is a floating windmills by Worldwide Wind. So I think that is another opportunity, and pumped hydro is another thing which we can tap. We are promoting active private PPP mode. We would like to promote floating solar. Then I think the Kochi Green Hydrogen Hub, already we have awarded the work to GIZ is supporting in this regard. Then global cooperation, we are in touch with I think all the Hamburg port and Rotterdam, etc. to develop that. And then we have got enough demand centers, refinery, ammonia production, methanol. Then HICE already it is in the final stage of certification. I think HICE engine will be a game changer. There are two things. One is how to reduce the cost. One I said the membraneless electrolyzer. Second is how do we reduce the cost of the fuel cell, or the transition. So with the 10 to 12 lakhs, you can easily convert a IC engine into HICE engine. I think that will the long haul trucks and can go for that. Water transport, we are looking at hydrogen filling stations across the state with maybe liquid hydrogen, and then the boiler fuel can be used by Mirai cars and all. In fact, we are in touch. Toyota is helping us in joint project for a pilot with, in fact, they supplied a Mirai brand to new, second generation Mirai, and we are, our universities are working with them to study that and for maybe hydrogen highways. So where we can deploy, I think then Hydrogen Valley is another concept which we are working and Groningen and other universities are also cooperating with us. Then this is the green transport corridor which have been planned. You can see the water metro is one of the first of its kind in the entire world. So we are now trying to replace with it is with LTO battery. Now we are replacing with the fuel cell. So I think across the state you can go in the waterway. That's another major advantage. Then the transport corridors are planned. Integrated fueling stations is another integral part of that. So this in nutshell is what is being planned by us, and maybe I would like to maybe answer your queries if we have got anything. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Joshua. Yeah, actually, introducing us the national green hydrogen mission, as well as Kerala government very ambitious initiative for to making the Kerala green hydrogen hub. That's very much interesting. Thank you very much. You are very insightful presentation. Okay, so now I'd like to move on to next speaker, Ms. Naduhira Shani, ASEAN Center for Energy. So she will talk about hydrogen development in Indonesia. So Naduhira-san, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Tamura-san, for the opportunity. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Shani. Today, I want to talk about the hydrogen role in the decarbonizing energy sector in ASEAN. And then I will also update some of the leading countries in ASEAN that is developing hydrogen. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I just to put context before we are talking about hydrogen, I just want to share like the ASEAN context, how and why we need to consider hydrogen as a technology in this region. First is because we have a regional target under our APAEC plan, which is ASEAN Plan of Action for Energy Cooperations, which we aim to reach the renewable energy in the total energy supply by 23% in 2025. And apart from that, every ASEAN countries has ratified their climate target under the NDC. And some of them already also aiming for achieving net zero emissions by 2050 or 2060 and earlier. So I think under this context, hydrogen is potential to be along decarbonization solutions as part of the strategy for the ASEAN countries to realize and achieve the target. The second thing is ASEAN in the region itself, it has a big potential for hydrogen productions, basically for green hydrogen productions, because we have a lot of renewable energy potential that varies through country. And then also some countries also have natural gas potential. And if combined with the CCUS later, we can be like a big producer of blue hydrogen. So it's with the resource potential it has, ASEAN is very well positioned to become a clean hydrogen producer if in the region we accelerate the renewable energy deployment and also pursue the climate target that is committed. And the third thing is ASEAN is also a growing industrial demand. And it's also surrounded by potential hydrogen demand center. So if you could see the graph here, it's projections by Deloitte. that the ASEAN itself in 2030 is potential to export to fulfill the needs of hydrogen in Japan and Korea, but also later in the far future, we will also need the hydrogen to consume domestically to reach our climate target. So that's the reasons why ASEAN needs to think about and consider to use hydrogen technology. Can we go to the next slide, please? So it comes to the questions when we should consider hydrogen, because I think like right now, hydrogen is very hot topic and very compelling and provides opportunity. But also we need to also keep in mind that hydrogen efficiency is often lower to other alternative solutions. So it has lower energy density compared to other things. So it also hard to transport and also hard to store, which end up requiring a new infrastructure to support that. And the third is the cost, as mentioned by previous panels as well, that the cost of hydrogen and to store that, it's also a big challenge, and it really depends on the price of the renewable electricity. So it's important that for in ASEAN context that we need to consider and compare hydrogen with other alternatives. And the enablers of making hydrogen develop in the region in ASEAN is first is massive penetrations of renewable energy, and then the stringent decarbonization policy in the energy sector, such as carbon pricing for ASEAN. And third is the advancement for hydrogen technology and its supporting technology like CCUS and others, so that it answers like when ASEAN will consider this technology if these enablers are happen in the region. Next slide, please. Yeah. So I just want to update you about the leading or pioneer countries in the regions that start to put interest and develop hydrogen. There are two countries that has a quite fast progress of development for hydrogen. First is Singapore. So recently Singapore published this publications, the study of hydrogen imports and downstream applications for Singapore. So this is basically a reference and publications that the government of Singapore to identify where are the low-hanging fruit options to utilize hydrogen and where the hydrogen will coming from, because Singapore stated that it will be hydrogen hub in the region. So this publication, they done a remarkable job in identifying and also the cost and where the hydrogen can come from to supply to Singapore. And the second is Indonesia. So Indonesia currently recently have established a net zero emission roadmap under the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources. So one of the key solutions or key strategies under that NZE roadmap is hydrogen. They identify that hydrogen will be used in Indonesia starting 2030, and it will start with transport sector, followed by industrial sector and the power sector to some extent. And they are aiming for utilizing low carbon hydrogen in the future, but in the development they will also consider blue hydrogen that is coming from natural gas. And we've seen in Indonesia that the market players are also quite fast and put a lot of progress. Like Pertamina, the state-owned oil company, they are aiming, they have this hydrogen roadmap because they want to also become the regional market players to a green hydrogen producer and targeting export for Japan and Korea. And they want to first piloting in 2028. And as Indonesia also a third ammonia producer, the biggest ammonia producer in the world, the fertilizer company also looks the opportunity and build a roadmap to produce a blue and green ammonia, and starting with a pilot as soon as in 2026. So the Indonesia also have a plan to make the hydrogen blend in the new capital city in Borneo. So that's the progress of the hydrogen development in Indonesia. And I think to end my talks, I want just to conclude that the things that ASEAN need to do next in related to hydrogen. First is to identify the priority sector for hydrogen technology, and also develop a clear hydrogen technology utilization strategy, because I think there are a lot of alternative options, and sometimes hydrogen is not most efficient routes for decarbonizations. So in order to make an efficient decisions to utilize hydrogen, we need to also compare and look the other alternatives. And it's also we need to increase the capacity by having hydrogen pilot and demonstration projects, and as well as like what we've seen or here earlier, that we need to collaborate and to increase the capacity of the technology, hydrogen technology, and its supply chain. I think that's all from my side. Tamura-san, over to you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nakira-san, for sharing your insight on the role of hydrogen in ASEAN countries and possible enablers, and also update on the hydrogen-related initiative, and also providing us some future prospect for hydrogen. Yeah, thank you very much. So I'd like to move on to next, last but not least, the speakers, Meng Yuan, Aalborg University. So she will talk about hydrogen development in China. Meng-san, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Tamara-san. I'm sharing my screen now. I will continue our discussion today in the hydrogen development in China. In my presentation, I will go through the status of the hydrogen industry in China, the national strategies, and also some projection for the future hydrogen development in China. As you may already know that in terms of the amount of hydrogen production and the consumption, China has been leading the country in the past few years. In 2020, China has produced around 33 million ton hydrogen, which is around 30% of the global total numbers. But as seen as many other countries, the current production is mainly based on fossil fuel from the coal and natural gas. And from the consumption side, China's hydrogen consumption are made mainly from the chemical and refinery industry to produce ammonia, methanol, and also in the refining industry. In the last year, 2022, China has released its first national hydrogen plan, targeting the year up to 2035. And this plan is aiming to support the national climate target for 2060 carbon neutralities. This national hydrogen plan is is divided into 3 steps, incrementally up to 2035. In the beginning, in 2025, there is a relatively complete policy environment is expected to be ready for the further development of the whole industry. There are also some quantitative indicators for the fuel cell vehicles and also green hydrogen production. By 2030, there will be expected to have a relative complete technology innovation systems and also encourage the wide application for green hydrogen. By 2035, a comprehensive hydrogen industry supporting scheme will be ready. In this scheme, the main target is to build a diversified hydrogen application from all energy sectors, including transportation, energy storage, and also some heavy industries, as mentioned before. Under this national plan, we have 4 specific major tasks to identify the development of the plan. These 4 tasks including the innovation system supporting the development of industry and the coordinated development of the hydrogen infrastructure across the country, and also study, promote a diversified demonstration application, and also the policy environment to be ready. In the coming few slides, I will show some numbers about the projection for future scenarios for the hydrogen industry in China. If we look at different analyses and different scenarios, we will easily find that people have different expectation and interpretation into the future. From the APS scenario of IEA, we can see that they expect to have a 90 million ton hydrogen production, green hydrogen production in 2060. But from the local China Hydrogen Alliance, they have a more ambitious target to reach 130 million ton by 2060. Here I would like to say that despite different analyses by different people, but we can still foresee some similar trends in the development. There will be around 60% growth from the demand in the transportation sector. This transportation sector also include the green fuels produced from renewable energy and hydrogen, also for the shipping and aviation sector. And the rest of 30% will come from major the industry process, including the steel making and also chemical and refining industry. If we look at the green hydrogen capacity up to 2030, China and Europe will lead the global electrolysis manufacture capacity. According to the analysis of China Hydrogen Alliance, there would have a potential to reach at least 100 gigawatts of accumulated green hydrogen capacity by 2030. Then the question is, how can we produce, transport, and use the green hydrogen in the wide landscape of China? For our audience who are not very familiar with the Chinese map, let's look at the map together. China have the abundant wind and solar source mainly in the north part and the west part, but the population density is largely centered in the east coast and the middle area, and also the industry are located in those areas. So the problem, the issue of transportation of the green hydrogen from the renewable abundant place to the industry location is quite a big challenge. And in this map, we can see some potential green hydrogen mega bases across the country. Some of them are located nearing the east coast, which can use the wind solar from the offshore. And we can also transport some green hydrogen from the west part to the east part for the industry production. As I mentioned, the hydrogen infrastructure is very important for the development here in China. But currently, there are only very few hydrogen pipelines running in China. The announced hydrogen pipeline is up to 400 kilometers, but right now it's only 100 is running. China is also working on developing both the pure hydrogen pipelines and also blending the hydrogen into the existing gas pipeline network. If you look at the map in the right hand, it shows the existing and planned natural gas pipeline across China. So there's a major pipeline from the west to the east. We can use this gas pipeline to implement some blending, up to 20% blending of hydrogen through this network. And also some major petroleum companies, they have announced their plan to build the pure hydrogen pipeline across the country. The newest one is around 400 kilometers from Inner Mongolia to Beijing. We believe that those hydrogen infrastructure will be a strong support for the further development of the hydrogen production and utilization in China. That's a presentation from me. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. Meng Yuan, for introducing China's national hydrogen strategy, and also highlighting some importance of the infrastructure for hydrogen development in China. I think it's common to other countries as well. So I think it's a good opportunity for us to learn each other. Yes, thank you very much, all 5 speakers. Unfortunately, already time is out, so I cannot take the question from the floor. But kindly, all the speakers already answer the question by typing their answer to the question. So I think all the questions are already sorted out. Thank you very much for your cooperation, and also thank you very much for your very insightful input for us on regarding this really dynamic, important aspect of this new energy transition. That means the hydrogen. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tamura-san.
Then I'd like to move to next session. So yeah, next moderator is Badori-san. I think you'll be the chair of the next session. Okay.
Thank you very much.
You have the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kentaro-san. I think first of all, I'd like to thank IGS for inviting me, Dr. Nandakumar and other colleagues for inviting me, and it has been a wonderful webinar, very insightful on what is happening in the green hydrogen landscape across the world. In this session also, we have a great lineup of speakers who are experts in this area, who have been doing some really wonderful work. I would first like to invite Mr. Mustafa Moinuddin, who is the Deputy Director of Integrated Sustainability Center at IGES, to talk about green hydrogen strategies. The floor is yours, Mr. Moinuddin, and please keep your discussion to less than 8 minutes. Please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gopalakrishnan. Let me share my screen. Okay, can you see my screen now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay,
thanks again. So hello everybody, I'm Mustafa from IGS, and I'm going to talk about one of our ongoing studies on the review of national hydrogen strategies, national and regional hydrogen strategies. This is actually a preliminary, the ongoing study, so my results are still quite preliminary, but I think it's still worth to share some of the findings with you. So basically, as we have already seen throughout the webinar today, there is a growing interest in hydrogen. Many countries around the world, they are adopting hydrogen strategies. But we know that commercial production and use of hydrogen is not a thing. We have been producing hydrogen for quite a long time. So why this renewed interest? I think we already have the answer. We already know some of the reasons why we are pursuing the hydrogen, addressing climate change, energy security, and so on. But in this study, we wanted to learn more from the national hydrogen strategies across the world. We wanted to do a systematic review of these strategies for several reasons. First is to stocktake where the strategies are at present, and to understand the common objectives and issues across these national strategies, and to point out the key features and priorities of these strategies, and to see if these strategies cater to the needs of the net zero agenda. So it means that we are particularly focusing on green hydrogen. So here is like a list of the countries and the European Union as well, from where we collected the hydrogen strategies. You can see in the map, there are 45 strategies that we collected to conduct this review. Now, for some of them, we have the full text. For some of them, we don't have the full text publicly available. We have to rely on the media reports. Sometimes these are not in English. They're in different languages. So some of the issues can be lost in translation. But anyway, we tried to do a preliminary study based on what we have at hand. As I said, this is a systematic literature review. So here is an overview of the methodology. I used NVivo 12 Plus software to do this study. I will not go into the details, but basically we imported all the strategies into our program, and then we explored these strategies with coding and queries to gather some insights, then to visualize and to make memos so that we can come up with the answers to some of our questions. So here are the queries and questions that we tried to identify from this study. On the left side, you can see some of the examples. Like, do the strategies talk about investment and cooperation in technology development? What are the major priorities? What was the focus on green hydrogen? And how about cost effectiveness? All these things, whether they are being discussed or not. So these are some examples, but on the right side, you see some specific topics or issues which were part of our queries. Green hydrogen, technology innovation, cost aspects, partnership and collaboration, and so on. So I will try to give you a very quick summary of all these issues here. Before going into these issues, we also conducted try to understand the key features of these strategies, the 45 strategies that we took into consideration. So for this, we conducted frequency analysis, word frequency analysis, as well as clustering, association, and on the right side, you can see the linkages among these topics. So I think you cannot read them. It's very small. But anyway, we did all these things to have a general idea of what these strategies talk about. You can see on the left side that we have, for example, green hydrogen technology, development, investments, decarbonization, and all these things coming up over here. Now let's move on to the first topic, which is about green and clean hydrogen, and we tried to extract some of the important aspects that were reflected in the strategies. On the top right part, you see like a word map, that word tree that we generated using NVivo software. Very small, but anyway, this is how we try to extract the information from these strategies. For green and clean hydrogen, there was a very pronounced interest from many countries to establish clean hydrogen as an alternative energy source, and to produce green hydrogen and green ammonia using renewable resources. There were explicit interest in export and import of green hydrogen, with including setting up targets for green hydrogen production, export and import, and so on. Also identifying the sectors like the transport sector, the infrastructure needed for green hydrogen, particularly including hydrogen transportation from one place to another, supply chain development, and so on. And on the left side, you can see that roughly 50% of the countries, actually 47% of the countries covered in this study, they talked quite strongly about green and clean hydrogen, and some of the key players have been identified. This is based on the systematic review that we conducted. And one of my observations here is that the ambitions and details are quite uneven across the cover strategies, and quite often they lack the urgency of accelerating the net zero transition or like decarbonization efforts. I move on to technology and innovation. The structure of this, or the presentation of this slide is same as before. We see that much higher number of countries are actually talking about technology innovation and R&D. It's close to 90%. And here, the integration of hydrogen technologies in future energy systems, importance of research and innovation in hydrogen technologies, clean hydrogen production technologies, storage and distribution, the financial viability, as well as price competitiveness, market for hydrogen technologies, so on, have been discussed. But I think among them, I think one of the important aspects is price competitiveness, which will be one of the key issues when we talk about technology innovation, R&D, and as we move forward on this. Next, it is about partnership and collaboration. This study shows relatively small, like 1/3 of the strategies covering or addressing the issue of partnership and collaboration, which is a little bit surprising for me. But anyway, they talk about strategic partnerships, regional and global partnerships, government-to-government collaborations, but also public and private partnerships, business models development, market-based business models, collaboration in research and development, as well as long-term value chain creation. And I think in here, I found that compared to other countries and regions, the European approaches appear to be relatively more advanced as of now. And for cost-related aspects, we see I reiterate this, that the price competitiveness of hydrogen technologies and hydrogen production compared to fossil fuels is of high priority in many of the strategies, and also production of low-cost carbon into hydrogen. And an interesting thing is to develop demand-side policies to gradually reduce the cost of hydrogen, and the cost reduction to scale up the hydrogen-related projects and activities. And my observation here is that along with the technological advances, maybe creating a market and increasing the social acceptance of hydrogen will be quite important, which is to some extent related to the structural changes discussion that we had in the very first panel today. For investment plans and strategies, we have roughly 50% of this country strategies reflecting this, and quite a number of issues came up. For example, the establishment of an investment tax credit to support investment, also investment in promoting cooperation and collaboration within and beyond the borders, governments investments, in particular in the various sectors, including hydrogen transport, distribution and storage, green infrastructure, and then of course we also need like investment needs analysis. This also came up here. Investments in R&D and public-private partnership, these are also quite important. And again, here, one of my observations is that maybe a stronger focus on green infrastructure and cooperation on green hydrogen production technologies will be needed. Climate change and decarbonization, it has come up quite often among many of these strategies, but of course, we talk about climate neutral hydrogen, then climate change mitigation using hydrogen, industrial decarbonization, targets, hydrogen targets for 2030, or like how to use hydrogen for hard to abate sectors. Around 50% of the countries talked about this, but I think in these strategies, the role of hydrogen in climate mitigation is sometimes discussed without explicitly referring to green hydrogen from renewables. If the hydrogen is not green, as we have heard before today, it may not be feasible for net zero transition. Here is here we talk about the infrastructure for hydrogen. Again, roughly 50% countries talked about it with strong reference, particularly for the roadmap on hydrogen infrastructure, global hydrogen market, transport and storage infrastructure, regulatory infrastructure, and for supply chain related issues. And my observation is that yes, infrastructure will be one of the key issues that we need to address when you talk about like a green hydrogen economy. And for this, we need both hard and soft or regulatory infrastructure. Hydrogen trade, we heard a lot about it today. I will not go into the details here, but yeah, we need a hydrogen market, regional as well as global, including import and transit hub and like clean hydrogen trade initiative like Australia is doing, and infrastructure for for trade. But my observation is that various hydrogen-related technologies, the trade in these technologies were not that prominently featured in many of these strategies. Safety aspects were relatively like small, less focused in these strategies, but some of them talked about safety management and other things, and like safety regulations, improvement of standards, and safety on safety for hydrogen use. Here are some of the examples of the plans and timelines for green hydrogen rollout. You can see, I will not read the details, but we have heard many of the national strategies today, but just give you some examples of 5 countries here. And then I want to come up to summarize some of the important observations and insights that I learned by conducting this study. First one is that reducing gray hydrogen and providing low carbon or zero carbon alternatives, particularly to the hard to abate decarbonized sectors, will be something very important. And some of the strategies talked about it. And we also need to identify some of the areas for priority policy actions, including investment, production and demand sectors, market and infrastructure development, R&D cooperation, as well as international cooperation in green hydrogen. I already mentioned about regulatory frameworks for green hydrogen, and we also need to work. Countries should come up with green hydrogen targets in the medium to long term, and develop national international supply chains for hydrogen, and focus on development and deployment of cost-effective green hydrogen technologies, and social acceptance of hydrogen, as well as use of hydrogen for seasonal power generation. This is my last slide. As I mentioned, this is a work in progress. So the results are quite preliminary because first of all, the strategies and policies that we covered, not all of them are available online. So sometimes we have to rely on media resources, and some are in native languages. And since we are doing this systematic literature review, or when we try to translate it, say using Google, some of the essence elements will be lost in translation. And I think in continuation of this work, we should also look into other policy documents, including subnational ones, as well as initiatives from the private sector. Again, I'll try to enhance the coverage and methodology, in particular, to identify the gaps in my next work on this topic. Thank you very much. I'd like to stop here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moinuddin. Very insightful study, and like you rightly said, I think this is in a way the tip of the iceberg, and a lot more can be explored from various sources. For example, in some of the work I've been doing with Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, there is also a lot of plans there in terms of green hydrogen in NEOM and other places. I think that is probably not there in a policy document or a strategic document, but pretty much that's there in the public domain. So these are some examples, and I think there is just one question from Johanna's filling. How is the status of international activities for the alignment of hydrogen categorization? Is there a commonly accepted clean, green, low carbon, zero carbon hydrogen? That's a great question. So would you like to answer this?
Yeah, let me try to write it down, but I think there are like some other people who can answer it even better than. But anyway, I'll try to respond in the chat room.
Okay, great. I think we can follow that strategy for all the questions, so we can answer live to save time. So our next speaker, thank you again, Mr. Moinuddin, for the wonderful presentation. And also, apart from the things that you mentioned, it's also for people like me, it's also good learning about this software for doing this kind of analysis. Thank you once again. The next speaker is Mr. Deepak Krishnan. But I'm through Niti Aayog in Government of India. I also had some opportunity to work on some of the green hydrogen work in India. And this has been a great program there with a lot of emphasis. So Mr. Deepak is Associate Director at World Resource Institute India Energy Program. He leads work on clean energy initiatives for various consumer categories, clean energy transitions and water energy mixes. So previously he has worked with many companies like some of the big four companies on energy consulting. So really glad to have you, Mr. Deepak, and looking forward to hearing from you about India's green hydrogen mission and the review of it. Please go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Padmanabhan. And I hope my screen is visible.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So many thanks to the organizers, IGS, and for giving us the opportunity to co-organize this webinar with you. And many thanks to my colleagues who have also worked on the green hydrogen mission along with MNRE for helping put this together. So Mr. Jyotilal in the earlier session had touched upon India's green hydrogen mission, and given the time constraint, what I'll do is very quickly run you through some of the elements that constitute this mission, and explain how it fits well within the overarching theme of this particular session, wherein we are looking at the techno-economic feasibility. Now, while that is an essential feature and requirement of every a successful project, we must also see that this is an evolving sector, and from a government's perspective, when it is making policy, how does techno-economic viability fall into that, and therefore what kind of forward-looking initiatives can be considered in part of a green hydrogen policy. So I'll just skip this. So India's National Green Hydrogen Mission was released recently, and it forms a major, it assumes great importance given our net zero targets of 2070, and also the fact that our energy demand is, going to grow up significantly. And as we also aim for better quality of life for citizens, growing the economy, also making the different sectors competitive, green hydrogen does come in to play a very significant role. Why does India need to focus on green hydrogen? Very clear stated reasons. The immediate effect is to reduce import of fertilizers and possibly also crude oil going forward. The country has very vast RE reserves, and significant share of it is still untapped. We are also seeing a trend of decreasing renewable energy tariffs, enabled by business models, technology, contractual innovations, as well as the fact that different players see the country as a next growth hub. And we are also expecting to see a rapid decline in the technology cost, which will be necessary to grow the green hydrogen sector. Now, as on today, if you see, costs are hovering around the $3 to $4 per kg mark, and significantly renewable electricity, contributes a significant share to that. And one of the focus of India's green hydrogen mission and the associated RE policies, which have been there for the last many years, is to ensure that there is this reduction in this cost as the capacity also goes up. The mission focuses very clearly on two aspects. One is demand creation, where both within fossil fuels and fertilizers, it is to do with substituting imports, create domestic demand across sectoral applications like steel is one of the instances that has been mentioned earlier, and is an obvious choice. Different developments are also happening there, and whatever balance is there, and if you're able to increase beyond the minimum target of 5 million metric tons by 2030, how much of it can be exported and to where? Mr. Jyotilal also spoke about India's positioning as an export market, typical likely countries that we could target. He also threw some light upon some of the conversations and negotiations that are going on. So hopefully those will fructify, and we would also be a very important export market. The second pillar of the mission is on the incentivizing the supply front, where under something which is abbreviated as SITE, that is Strategic Interventions for Green Hydrogen Transition, we are looking at financial incentives for initially the electrolyzer manufacturing and then subsequently ramp up the green hydrogen production. So we'll talk about that going forward. Again, enablers, we saw that renewable energy resources are plentiful, and one of the first things that came out as a prelude to this larger mission document was an easing of the grid access charges. So there are concepts like banking of electricity, cross subsidy surcharge, and open access charges. I'll be happy to elaborate on them later on. So ensuring that at least the renewable energy supply part for green hydrogen electrolyzers is eased, and that eases a little bit on the price point. R&D is another aspect which has been focus of this mission. I'll touch upon that later. Ease of doing business. This is part of the larger effort across sectors to bring in more manufacturing, design, and R&D setups within India. Skill development, public awareness, creation of regulations and standards, and last but not the least, the infrastructure and supply chain, ranging from ports to refueling facilities, pipelines, and even hydrogen hubs are some of the key enablers. Now, key outcomes, again, Mr. Jyotilal had touched upon this, so very quickly, at least 5 million metric tons by 2030, 60 to 100 gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity, necessary RE capacity for ensuring this import savings of 1 lakh rupee crores, averting 50 million metric tons of carbon emissions, jobs that come along with it, and investments that would come into the market. Mission outlay, a very quick snapshot. As you can see, a large chunk is devoted to the component called SITE, which is focused on the electrolyzer and the green hydrogen production itself. And then you can see a bunch of numbers against different heads, which actually show that the other points about enablers are not just rhetoric, but they're actually being supported by money that goes in. And all this actually will play a significant role in ensuring that projects that come forward are both technically and economically viable. Now, very quickly to take you through the site interventions. One is on electrolyzer manufacturing, which has a smaller share of the significant outlay that has been put out. A lot of emphasis placed upon the local value addition, the idea being to lower costs, maximize indigenization efforts, and create good quality products which are competitive. So you can see the incentive availability across a 5-year period, very clear definition of how incentive payout is going to be made. The explanatory document that has been issued by the ministry also speaks about how the incentive, how the different components, that is local value addition and domestic value addition, are going to be captured. One other important thing is that if you see at the bottom, there are 2 buckets under which bids have been invited by the coordinating agency, that is SECI, where in a technology agnostic manner, 1,200 megawatts is being bid out, and indigenously developed stack technology, there is a focus of 300 megawatt. This ties into what Stephen Peters from ADB mentioned earlier about how local technologies and production means for hydrogen is actually a enabler for resilience, and this actually becomes more pronounced when you look at the second component, that is the incentive scheme for actual green hydrogen production. You'll also see a similar two tranches that are there. One is a technology agnostic pathway of close to 400,000 million tons per annum, metric tons per annum, and then a biomass-based pathway of 40,000 metric tons per annum. A lot of work has been going on in terms of using biomass for production of green hydrogen, and I would like to reiterate that, to my knowledge, not all of it is crop-based. These are essentially waste products of different other production facilities. So it also is a effort by the country to look at ensuring food ensuring the food security, while also looking at how biomass can be used for production of green hydrogen. Similar amounts of incentive spread across a 3-year period for every kg of green hydrogen that is produced. Pilot projects are the next phase of, or rather the next horizon that is being looked at across industry with DRI steel, industrial process heating, mobility. There have been a few pilots that have been announced, and I also believe some have taken off, hydrogen fueled trucks. There is clarity that in the within the city market, batteries may be superior at the moment, but in long distance trucking, heavy duty trucking, how does hydrogen come into play? Similarly, maritime is a very big component that is to be considered. Mr. Jyotilal also spoke about the number of ships that are going to be needed. There are targets looking at how many ships need to be running on ammonia or green hydrogen out of it. Associated infrastructure along with that, and as I also mentioned, green hydrogen from agriculture residue, also looking at municipal solid waste and sewerage to hydrogen are also other pilot projects that are being considered. R&D, very quickly, there are 3 buckets. One is a mission mode project, which look at the urgent and immediate need. Similarly, what are the grand challenges where right now immediate solutions are not there, but going forward, they could be a game changer. And blue sky projects, which look at what is currently seen as impossible, but going forward can form a formidable industry base for the country. Again, regulations, codes, and standards are also being addressed by the green hydrogen mission. There are different subgroups which involve a lot of the relevant ministries to look at all these aspects. Very quick snapshot of what is happening as far as implementation is considered. Governance framework, the empowered group, advisory group, and the mission secretariat are notified. The 2 concept notes on the site program, which I presented a snapshot, have been issued. Recently, a definition of green hydrogen also has been released by the ministry, which talks about the maximum amount of carbon dioxide content that is allowed because of the process. Similarly, reduction of renewable energy cost and the R&D roadmap. State level, Mr. Jyotilal spoke about what all Kerala is looking at, but in addition, we also have different states like UP, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Odisha, and Gujarat also come out with their green hydrogen policies. It foretells a great competitive spirit within the among the states to ensure that green hydrogen production takes off within the country. A very quick snapshot of what we have been doing in this space. One is to identify and assess potential hydrogen hubs by looking at consumption sites, initially with oil refineries and fertilizer plants being the target group, which will have to kickstart the sector, analyze what is the resource availability, infrastructure requirements, and the demand, which is where all the techno-economic feasibilities would come in. Similarly, we have also been looking at hydrogen production from biomass, looking at, for instance, supply chains and bottlenecks, which have plagued the sector significantly in the past. Is the residue available? Do we need to tap into the food sources for whatever reasons? and we are going to come out with a working paper on the technical feasibility assessment of different hydrogen production routes from biomass. We have also been fortunate to be given an opportunity to work as part of the G20 with the G20 presidency on looking at critical mineral assessment for electrolyzers. Again, looking at supply chain assessments and bottlenecks. I'll close my presentation with this and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Deepak. That was very detailed and comprehensive explanation of the green hydrogen strategy in India. So I would like to request Mr. George Haas to discuss about the question of sustainable and fair production of green hydrogen and also trade aspects there. He is currently the head of Globalization and Transformation Division of Heinrich Böll Foundation, and he covers international financial and economic affairs and global governance. The floor is all yours, Mr. Haas.
Yes, thank you so much for inviting me to this important seminar. Thanks to the organizers for allowing me to speak here from Europe, from Berlin. I hope you hear me well. I am also going to share my screen, so just a moment for a presentation. So I hope it is visible. And what I'm speaking about are maybe less the technical aspects and more, I would say, wider sustainability aspects. And it's the result of, a longer discussion within our own organization and with partners that we have mostly in Africa and Latin America. Let me just... so to summarize our overall perspective that we have developed in this project is that on the one hand, development of hydrogen and green hydrogen in particular is a necessity. They are necessary for the decarbonization of hard to abate sectors that has been mentioned here. At the same time, it's also a bit of a hype and it's a bit of a risk because on the one hand, we see that the fossil industry sees hydrogen as an opportunity to justify new gas infrastructure under the label of hydrogen ready, or even the investment in renewing coal power. I mean, this ammonia co-firing, which I think is just a wrong route. So to increase the lock-in into fossil fuel infrastructure and to delay the transition to a zero carbon energy. And this is also relates to the use of hydrogen where direct electrification would be possible. Using hydrogen in places where electricity could be used directly will actually delay the transition to a 100% green energy system. And so therefore, it's actually a bit of a problem. And green hydrogen itself is much preferable to hydrogen from other colors, but it still requires a lot of land and water. And there's a risk of land grabbing and water grabbing for green hydrogen and production of export, where essentially in countries with relatively weak governance and insufficient protection of local rights. So it must be avoided such a green grabbing through strong environmental, social, and human rights standards. Let me say at the beginning, I think it is a bit spoken a lot about hydrogen as being the new oil or the new gas as an energy carrier. I think hydrogen is actually a relatively bad energy carrier because at the production from renewable energy, you lose about a third of electricity. Then it's very difficult to transport, it's highly volatile, it's costly to transport it, and you have, easily losses through steaming off. And then when you reconvert it to electricity, again, you lose another third. So it's a high cost of hydrogen itself, liquid hydrogen traded via ships. And we don't think that hydrogen, pure hydrogen trade via shipments will take off. There will be some hydrogen trade via pipelines, but that limits the distance where you can trade it. And the international trade by sea will essentially be derivatives like ammonia, and it will only really be economically viable and attractive if the end use is the ammonia and not the hydrogen, because the reconversion from ammonia to hydrogen again will produce significant economic losses, and at the end of the day, it's unlikely to be competitive. Hydrogen is not so much an energy carrier, but a crucial raw material and reactant, and we see this, in the steel industry where it's needed to reduce iron ore to iron. Here's a reactant. It's not so much the energy aspect of it. So it's important, but it's not the energy carrier of the future. There was the vision that you have a hydrogen economy where hydrogen is being used for everything. The Swiss Army energy has been Swiss Army knife. And we know a Swiss Army knife is great. You can do many things with it, but actually you can even cut your hair with it, but actually it's not very good at cutting hairs with a Swiss Army knife. So for most of the uses that you can use hydrogen, there are other uses which are more practical and more economic. And therefore it's really important to observe the hydrogen ladder. My colleague Breich has clearly promoted this. There's a couple of uses that are clearly unavoidable where it's really needed, but there are a lot of uses down at the ladder which are actually uncompetitive and not so wise to use them. And I would say over time we have seen that more and more uses have been moving in some way down the scale, have been less attractive because the direct electrification has been making great advances also in heavy industrial uses. There's a lot of opportunities there. We have a problem with hydrogen, with blue hydrogen, because the origin is natural gas, and we have this very significant methane problem from the production of natural gas. It's a very significant greenhouse gas. And if you add the global warming effect of the leakage of methane at the natural gas production, and if you also take into account realistic empirical data of CO2 capture, actually blue hydrogen may be more polluting than using natural gas directly. So we think pure blue hydrogen is actually a very risky bet that this all will work, and most likely it won't, and it will create new environmental hazards. It's also losing competitiveness rapidly compared to green hydrogen. So if hydrogen, it needs to be green. Our overall conclusion from this more technical assessment is we need to scale up green hydrogen rapidly and sustainably and avoid other colors of hydrogen. But on its usage side, really be very, very focused on the very essential unavoidable end uses, not passenger cars, trucks, and buses, to replace fossil fuels with green hydrogens, not just to complement them and to avoid rebound effects. There's a bit of a hype that you can say, okay, by using hydrogen, you can just easily waste energy because it's, it's clean. So let's go for space travel. I think it's a very risky thing. Just expand desires instead of replacing the uses we have actually. And finally, what I already meant is really important to avoid the greenwashing of fossil infrastructure. Now, looking at the hydrogen production for export in developing countries, and we have mostly worked with Africa and Latin America, we see a risk and an opportunity. Unless the production is guided by clear sustainability and developmental strategy, there is the expansion of large-scale hydrogen production may have significant negative effects, and this could lead even to reputational risk for investors and for the whole industry. Without a clear industrial strategy for enhanced value add, it will also be a lost opportunity to reap benefits from clean industrializations, and we have in some way a repetition of relatively outdated extractive models. So therefore, this industry needs to be shaped by national, international policies and standards, and I will develop a bit further what this means. Let's look at how large-scale green hydrogen production looks like. And this is from a Namibian project, the kind of satellite view of a large-scale project there, and it's just huge areas of land. It's largely desert there, but it really amounts to very large areas of land, and it requires significant infrastructure and investment. It requires desalination, etc. And this land is no longer available for the uses of people that have traditionally used that land. You know, there are, even in dry areas, there are traditional land users, there are pastoralists, there are small-scale farmers, and it would be the height of environmental injustice if these people were displaced by this new hydrogen production. So we see really a great care needs to be taken in that respect to avoid grabbing land and water from poor people for the purposes of using it far away, relatively rich consumers. It could also be damaging to biodiversity. It could create a situation where local people don't have access to energy just to produce energy for somewhere else. And there could be a missed opportunity also for local value chain development. We have done country consultations in several countries. You see here the number of countries that we have been in, mostly Latin America and Africa. We have consulted with a large group of stakeholders, from local communities to government officials, and we have produced these country documents and then synthesized it to a global synthesis report. And the key recommendations is really that the countries need to integrate hydrogen into their overall development, energy and trade plans. So it should not be an isolated thing, but really integrated. It needs to be based on strong social and sustainability standards, including the respect for human rights and the do no harm principle for local communities. We need to be, from the beginning, look at the possibility and the need to go beyond just producing raw hydrogen and to create additional value add, to climb up the value chain. I think we have seen several references to that already. And the consumer countries like Europe or also like Japan or Korea need to support this value add in the countries where they source hydrogen from. They need to develop corresponding trade policies. Very important on the environmental side is that we need to prevent leakage from hydrogen pipelines and hydrogen infrastructure. Hydrogen is an indirect greenhouse gas, and we should not run into new problems if we see that after some time we have a considerable hydrogen leakage problem. The carbon footprint must be certified. I think this has been mentioned already. Water use is really a very, very critical issue. People are very concerned in the countries we have consulted. So desalination is probably the way to go in most countries that have access to seawater. And spatial planning is very essential in order to avoid problematic sites from a biodiversity aspect, but also from a land rights aspect. And on the social side, it's really important to promote community involvement and to respect the principle of free, prior, and informed consent for local communities. It's absolutely vital to avoid expropriation or delocalization of local communities. Instead, I think it's vital to explore the potential for synergistic use of land for both energy and pastoralism and agriculture, so agrovoltaics. Local communities need to be empowered to get the skills to use the jobs, and we need to create ways to enhance energy access for local communities that lack energy access. And all this needs to be integrated also into the procurement and certification frameworks for clean hydrogen, and I'm happy that Germany is starting to integrate such aspects into the procurement of its international H2 Global program. This is the website that we have created for some of the reports that we have developed in our project, and I'm very interested to respond to questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Haas. Very, very insightful presentation and highlighting these social and sustainability aspects. Now, I would like to invite Mr. Karnesh Kirtania from Bangladesh University of Engineering and Technology to discuss about the technical assessment of hydrogen development. I think we are also running short on time, so please try to finish as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Narman, and thank you for inviting me to the webinar to talk about the green hydrogen feasibility in developing countries. And I'm the last speaker, of course, and I think I'll try to keep it short, or I'll try to finish it on time. So we have learned a lot from our other panels and other panelists and speakers that what sort of goals are set for different countries, including developed countries and some of the developing countries. Some of them are very realistic, some of them are ambitious. And with that in mind, then I'll be talking about the technical challenges that developing countries are going to face through the implementation of green hydrogen. So the first two slides I'm going to skip because this has been discussed in very detail by the other speakers. So I'm going to move on to the challenges involved with the green hydrogen deployment. So as Jörg mentioned in the last talk, that water is a critical component for green hydrogen production, and that is what we found as well. And in this case, I'm going to put a number to that amount. So for 1 million ton of hydrogen, we have to use 16.6 million tons of potable water. So that is a lot of potable water to use for electrolysis. So that is something to keep in mind. Whereas in some developing countries, there will be the need for clean or potable water for drinking and other needs which cannot be directly utilized for hydrogen generation. So that is one of the problems that has to be addressed and to be incorporated in the hydrogen roadmap for any of the developing countries who are working with this. And if we think about green hydrogen cost, it has been already discussed. I'm not going to be in detail about this because we know that blue hydrogen is already competitive, but green hydrogen is not. Green hydrogen is hopefully will be competitive by 2050. But then again, blue hydrogen has a lot of other demerits that we know that it might actually incur more emission. But then again, but it is competitive. But then we need hydrogen. No matter what we say, we are going to use hydrogen for chemical industries and refineries and fertilizers. So considering that, so another issue is the green hydrogen for power generation. So one issue is to use it with the current turbine system so that we can replace gradually the natural gas which are being used in the turbines for power generation. So up to 30% can be mixed right now with some issues like NOx generation. That is because the high temperature generated by the hydrogen burned in the turbine compared to the natural gas. We are expecting that the technical challenge will be mitigated by some of the companies who are producing turbines especially for hydrogen. So those are the infrastructure issues with the developing countries. So there has to be some sort of changes in the machineries to actually incorporate this kind of technologies so that green hydrogen can be deployed. Whether it is going to be used for power, that is a different question. But if it is going to be used, then these will be one of the problems. Another problem is transportation. It has been already discussed about the intercontinental transport, and while importing hydrogen from other countries who has the potential to generate a lot of hydrogen from renewable sources, but then again, those technologies are to be converted to newer technologies so that they can be cost effective and even safer. Considering the liquefied hydrogen, it is difficult, and also if we are thinking about transporting hydrogen inside developing countries, there is no infrastructure. It has to be developed, and there has to be surely some safety regulations to handle this properly, so that there is no incident there with the safety and other things. So those are the challenges that are related to transportation. But if you think about the space requirement, Jörg already mentioned about this, but I'm going to put a number to this. So if we think about a 700 megawatt combined cycle plant using 100% hydrogen, we'll need about a solar photovoltaic cell area of 10,960 acres, which means it's about 40 square kilometers. So this is just for one plant. So if you think about several plants like this, it is true that we are going to need a lot of space. And if you're thinking about a developing country which is densely populated, then basically it is not possible. So considering that, it has to be considered when we are talking about electrolysis and to produce renewable hydrogen from solar energy. Now, moving on, and if we think about what sort of sources that we can use in developing countries, this is one of the reports from World Bank. They have identified that, well, wind, solar, hydropower, geothermal, and also biogenic sources. So if we look at the different kinds of renewable sources, those are specific to different countries. All countries do not have the luxury of all the renewable energies. So whichever is available can be utilized for electrolysis. And then again, we have to keep in mind that those energy electrolysis will require that amount of water and the space. And if we think about the waste, that is mostly underutilized in different countries, different developing countries, and those are the sources of methane emission as well. So there, if that can be utilized and that can be transformed into hydrogen, that probably can be used not only in energy, but then again, more importantly in ammonia plants and other chemical productions. So if we take an example like a country like Bangladesh, Bangladesh is heavily dependent on fossil fuel right now. Bangladesh has coal, diesel, natural gas, mostly natural gas for power generation. And if you think about the renewable sources, that it is still around 2 to 3%, and there are some imported energies. But the natural gas is depleting very, very fast. So there will be the need for alternative energy, which is native, for example, renewable sources, or there would be a need for the import of renewable energy. So the import of renewable energy can be in the form of hydrogen or can be in form of other ways, but then that is one of the options. But this is a very challenging situation. So for developing countries to manage their energy mix. Now, if we look at the renewable sources available in Bangladesh, there are two major sources of renewable energy. One is solar energy, which is projected to be about 2,700 megawatt by 2030. On the other hand, considering 50% collection efficiency of biogenic wastes, we have in Bangladesh about 2,000 megawatt electrical of energy. So solar energy, considering the amount of energy that is available for Bangladesh, that is most probably going to be included in the power grid as electrical energy rather than for generating hydrogen. That is the most logical option. So the other option would be probably going for bioenergy. And if we think about that how Bangladesh will progress towards a hydrogen roadmap, this is visualized in one of our projects. So if you look at that, Bangladesh as a developing country, it will be behind the developed countries by about 15 to 20 years because of the different technical challenges involved, apart from the economic challenges associated with the green hydrogen. So now, just before finishing the presentation, I'd just like to mention that there is an ongoing green hydrogen project in Bangladesh, which is working on the biohydrogen generation, addressing the technical and economic issues funded by USAID. And this is a consortium of several universities from different countries. And with this, I'd like to complete my talk, and I'd like to thank again for joining me. And I'd like to turn over the mic to the session chair, Mr. Narayana. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kitania, for the wonderful presentation. I think we can all join together to congratulate and thank all the speakers. We had a really wonderful discussion, and of course there are questions which can be answered live. Now we have come to the end of the session. Thank you once again to all the speakers. Now I would like to request respected Dr. Kazuhiko Takeuchi-san, President of IGS, to provide his concluding remarks.
Thank you very much. Esteemed speakers, dear participants, the insights and the dedication that have illuminated our discussions resonate profoundly as we conclude this event. The deliberations filled with impactful observations by the speakers have enriched our understanding that collaboration is crucial in accelerating green hydrogen development. Throughout this event, we have explored diverse perspectives in moderated sessions and engaging panel discussions that delved into the transformative potential of green hydrogen for achieving net zero transitions. The discussions on the regional dynamics evinced the diverse approaches, policies, and collaborations pursued by Asian nations for the development of green hydrogen. This diversity underscores the importance of tailored strategies suited to unique regional context. The session on techno-economic feasibility of green hydrogen deepened our comprehension of innovation and economics. The perspective highlighted the complexities of strategies, sustainable production methods, and the technical intricacies of the green hydrogen ecosystem. In my observation, three key takeaways emerged. Firstly, collaboration for green hydrogen adoption is crucial. Insights from experts gathered here emphasized united efforts and knowledge sharing to accelerate the development and adoption of green hydrogen technology. Secondly, context-specific policies are needed to shape the green hydrogen landscape. Tailored strategies rooted in regional realities underscore the importance of context-specific policies and technology adaptation. Thirdly, a balance among sustainability, economics, and technology is pivotal in developing a successful green hydrogen ecosystem. Carrying these insights forward, we aspire to contribute to shaping a policy environment conducive to a sustainable green hydrogen ecosystems in Asia. As we conclude, on behalf of the Institute for Environmental Strategies and the co-organized from the World Resources Institute, India, I extend our gratitude to all speakers, moderators, attendees, and our dedicated team. Thank you very much for your very active participation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kazuhiko-san. And thank you very much to all the speakers and other moderators and panelists. We had a wonderful discussion today, and looking forward to many more such webinars and discussions from IGS. Thank you so much once again. With this, we end this webinar. Thank you.